Imagine a world teetering on the edge of chaos, where a shadowy cabal known only as the Big Four pulls the strings of global destruction. In just 30 seconds, a cryptic telegram lands in the hands of Hercule Poirot, the brilliant Belgian detective, thrusting him into a deadly game of cat and mouse. Who are these mysterious masterminds? A cunning strategist, a ruthless financier, a seductive scientist, and a chameleon-like master of disguise. From the foggy streets of London to the vibrant masquerades of Venice, from the scorching sands of Egypt to a high-stakes showdown in New York, Poirot and his loyal friend Hastings race against time to unravel a conspiracy threatening to topple nations. Will Poirot's little grey cells outwit the Big Four before their catastrophic plan unfolds, or will the world fall to their sinister design? Join the chase where every clue raises more questions, and every step could be their last. Chapter 1. The Mysterious Telegram. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the polished wooden floors of Hercule Poirot's London flat, its golden rays filtering through the heavy drapes. The air was thick with the scent of polished mahogany, and the faint aroma of Poirot's preferred tisane, a delicate blend of herbs that he sipped with measured precision. The Belgian detective, immaculate in his tailored suit, sat at his desk, his small, precise hands arranging a stack of correspondence. With the care of an artist, his mustache, waxed to perfection, twitched slightly as he scanned a letter from an old friend, Captain Arthur Hastings, who had written of his imminent return to London after a sojourn in Argentina. Poirot's eyes, sharp and green as emeralds, flickered with a spark of anticipation. Hastings' letters were always a delight, filled with the exuberance of a man who saw the world through a lens of unshakable optimism. Yet, as Poirot reached for his silver letter opener, a faint unease stirred within him. The day had been unusually quiet, the kind of quiet that often preceded a storm. He dismissed the thought with a shake of his head, attributing it to the whims of an overactive mind. After all, his little grey cells, as he so fondly called them, were never at rest. The sharp rap at the door startled him from his reverie. His landlady, Mrs. Hudson, entered, her apron slightly askew, holding a small silver tray with a single telegram. "This just arrived for you, Mr. Poirot," she said, her voice tinged with a curiosity she could never quite suppress. The boy said it was urgent. Poirot's eyebrows arched as he took the telegram, his fingers brushing the crisp paper. "Mercy, Mrs. Hudson," he murmured, dismissing her with a polite nod. The door closed softly behind her, and he slit the envelope open with a practiced flick of his wrist. The message within was brief, yet its words sent a chill down his spine. "Beware the Big Four. Danger imminent. Paris, midnight." No signature, no return address, only those cryptic words typed in stark black ink. Poirot's mind raced, passing the message with the precision of a chess master. The Big Four, what could it mean? A code, a name, a warning. His fingers tapped rhythmically on the desk as he considered the possibilities. Paris at midnight suggested a rendezvous, but with whom? And why the urgency? The lack of detail was maddening, yet it ignited a spark of curiosity that Poirot could not ignore. He was still pondering the telegram when another knock sounded, this one more forceful. Before he could respond, the door swung open, and Captain Hastings burst in, his face flushed with excitement. His tweed suit was rumpled from travel, and his hat was slightly askew, but his grin was as infectious as ever. "Poirot, old chap," he exclaimed, striding forward to clasp Poirot's hand. "I couldn't wait another moment to see you. Argentina was splendid, but there's nothing like London." Poirot rose, a smile tugging at his lips. "Mon ami, you arrive with the timing of a stage actor. But tell me, what brings you here so suddenly? Your letter spoke of a visit next week." Hastings' grin faltered, and he ran a hand through his sandy hair. "Well, that's the thing, Poirot. I had the strangest encounter on the boat back. A fellow odd sort, pale as a ghost, cornered me in the lounge and started babbling about some group called the Big Four. Said they were plotting something monstrous. And then he paused, his eyes darting to the telegram on Poirot's desk. "Good heavens, is that about them too?" Poirot's moustache twitched, and he handed the telegram to Hastings. "Read, mon ami. It appears fate has conspired to bring us together at this precise moment." Hastings scanned the message, his brow furrowing. "The Big Four again. What's it all about, Poirot? Sounds like a bad novel." "Perhaps," Poirot said, his voice soft but laced with steel. "But a novel does not send telegrams, nor does it inspire fear in the eyes of a man on a ship. Tell me everything, Hastings, every detail of this encounter." Hastings sank into a chair, his enthusiasm tempered by the gravity of Poirot's tone. "It was late, near midnight, and I was in the lounge having a nightcap. This chap, twitchy with eyes like he hadn't slept in days, sat down across from me. He didn't introduce himself, just started talking in a low whisper. Said the Big Four were a secret organization, more powerful than any government, planning to bring the world to its knees. He mentioned names: Li Changyen, some American tycoon, a French scientist, and a fourth he wouldn't name. Said they were untouchable, but someone had to stop them." Poirot leaned forward, his eyes gleaming. "And what became of this man?" "That's the queer part," Hastings said, his voice dropping. "He got up to leave, said he'd said too much already. But as he reached the door, he staggered, clutched his chest, and collapsed. I rushed to help, but he was gone dead. Poirot, the ship's doctor said it was a heart attack, but I swear I saw a tiny dart in his neck. By the time I pointed it out, it was gone. Poirot's fingers steepled beneath his chin, his mind a whirlwind of thought. A dart, you say? Most interesting. Did this man leave anything behind? Hastings nodded, reaching into his pocket. He produced a small jade figurine, no larger than a chess pawn, carved in the shape of a dragon. It fell from his hand when he collapsed. I didn't know what to make of it, but I kept it. Poirot took the figurine, turning it over in his hands. The craftsmanship was exquisite, the dragon's scales etched with precision, but it was the base that caught his eye, a faint inscription in Chinese characters. This is no mere trinket, Hastings, he said. It is a clue, perhaps a key, and it confirms that our path leads to Paris. Paris, Hastings blinked. You mean we're going after this big for business? Mais oui, Poirot said, rising with a decisiveness that belied his small stature. We have been summoned, mon ami, by forces unknown. The Big Four, whoever they may be, have thrown down a gauntlet, and Hercule Poirot does not refuse a challenge. The journey to Paris was swift, arranged with the efficiency that only Poirot could muster. By the following evening they were aboard the Calais Paris Express, the train's rhythmic clatter a counterpoint to Poirot's relentless theorizing. Hastings, ever the loyal companion, listened with a mixture of awe and exasperation as Poirot spun possibilities from the scant evidence they possessed. The telegram, the dead man, the jade dragon all pointed to a conspiracy of unprecedented scale. Yet Poirot's calm certainty was infectious, and by the time they arrived in Paris, Hastings was ready to follow his friend into the lion's den. Their destination was a nondescript café in the Marais, chosen based on a hunch Poirot refused to explain. The café was dimly lit, its tables occupied by a mix of locals and tourists, none of whom seemed to notice the two newcomers. Poirot ordered a coffee, his eyes scanning the room with the precision of a hawk. Patience, Hastings, he murmured. The hour of midnight approaches. As the clock struck 12, a figure slipped into the café, a man in a dark overcoat, his face obscured by a low-brimmed hat. He moved with the grace of a predator, his eyes darting to Poirot's table. Before he took a seat in the corner, Poirot's lips curved into a faint smile. Our contact, perhaps, he whispered, rising to approach the stranger, but before he could take a step, the café's door burst open, and three men in black masks stormed in, their movements swift and coordinated. The patrons screamed, diving for cover as the intruders brandished pistols. Nobody moved. One shouted in accented French, his gaze locked onto Poirot, and for a moment, the air crackled with tension. Hastings, down, Poirot barked, his voice cutting through the chaos. Hastings dove behind a table as a shot rang out, shattering a mirror above Poirot's head. The detective, with a speed that belied his age, rolled to the side, his cane clattering to the floor. The masked men advanced, their leader barking orders in a language Hastings couldn't place. Chinese, perhaps. Poirot, ever resourceful, seized a nearby tray of pastries and hurled it at the nearest assailant, sending croissants flying. The distraction bought him a moment, and he darted toward the kitchen, Hastings scrambling after him. The masked men gave chase, their bullets splintering the wooden doorframe as Poirot and Hastings burst into the alley behind the café. The Paris night was alive with the sounds of the city-distant laughter, the clatter of horse-drawn carriages, the hum of early motorcars. But for Poirot and Hastings it was a battlefield. They sprinted down the cobblestone alley, the masked men in pursuit, their shouts echoing off the stone walls. Poirot's mind raced, calculating their options. The alley forked ahead, one path leading to a crowded boulevard, the other to a darkened courtyard. This way, Hastings, Poirot called, veering toward the courtyard. Hastings followed, his heart pounding as the sound of footsteps grew closer. The courtyard was a dead end, surrounded by high walls, but Poirot's eyes gleamed with purpose. He darted to a stack of crates, pulling Hastings behind them just as their pursuers entered. "Stay low," Poirot whispered, his voice calm despite the danger. From his pocket, he produced a small mirror, angling it to catch the moonlight. The reflection danced across the courtyard, catching the eye of the lead assailant. Confused, the man hesitated, and Poirot seized the moment, toppling a crate with a loud crash. The noise drew the attention of a nearby gendarme, whose whistle pierced the night. The masked men froze, then bolted, disappearing into the shadows as the gendarme's footsteps approached. Poirot and Hastings remained hidden, their breaths shallow, until the danger had passed. When they emerged, the courtyard was empty, save for a single object dropped in the assailant's host, a second jade figurine, identical to the first but bearing a different inscription. Poirot picked it up, his eyes narrowing. "The plot thickens, mon ami," he said, slipping the figurine into his pocket. "These men were no ordinary thugs. They were sent by the Big Four, and they know we are on their trail." Hastings, still catching his breath, managed a weak grin. "You've got a knack for trouble, Poirot. What now?" Now Poirot adjusted, his tie, his composure unshaken. "Now we return to our lodgings and examine our clues. The Big Four have made their first move, but they have underestimated Hercule Poirot. This game has only begun. Back at their hotel, Poirot spread the 2 figurines on a table, his magnifying glass in hand. The inscriptions, he deduced, were coordinates latitude and longitude pointing to a chateau on the outskirts of Paris. The telegram's warning, the dead man on the ship, the attack in the cafe, all were pieces of a puzzle that Poirot was determined to solve. As Hastings watched, half in awe, half in exhaustion, Poirot's little grey cells worked tirelessly, weaving a tapestry of logic from the chaos. The chapter closed with Poirot standing at the window, gazing out at the twinkling lights of Paris. "The Big Four believe they hold the advantage," he murmured, his voice soft but resolute. "What they do not know, Hercule Poirot. Tomorrow, Hastings, we go to the chateau, and there we shall uncover the truth." The night was still, but in Poirot's mind, the battle had already begun. The Big Four had made their presence known, but they had not reckoned with the brilliance of the little Belgian detective. With the jade figurines as his guide, Poirot was ready to take the next step into the heart of the conspiracy, his determination a beacon in the darkness. Chapter 2. The Paris Gambitha. Air in London was thick with the damp chill of an early spring evening as Hercule Poirot and Captain Arthur Hastings stepped off the train at Victoria Station. The telegram, its cryptic words still burning in Poirot's mind, had set them on a course to Paris. The Big Four strike at dawn. Paris holds the key. Trust no one. The message, delivered to Poirot's flat in a plain envelope, bore no signature. Only the faint scent of jasmine and a postmark from Dover. The dying man's words, gasped in a Soho alley after the assassination attempt, had only deepened the mystery. The jade figurine, Paris, Chateau d'Eon. Poirot's fingers twitched as he adjusted his perfectly knotted tie, his little grey cells already weaving a tapestry of possibilities. Hastings, ever the loyal companion, carried their modest luggage, a single leather valise for Poirot containing his meticulously pressed suits, and a bulkier case for himself. "I say, Poirot," Hastings ventured as they hailed a cab, "this whole business feels like something out of a penny dreadful. A secret society called the Big Four. It's rather theatrical, don't you think?" Poirot's mustache twitched, a sign of mild amusement. "Theatrical, mon ami, perhaps? But the stage of life often hosts the most dangerous dramas. This Big Four, they are not mere players." The jade figurine in my pocket, he patted his waistcoat, where the small, intricately carved object rested, is no prop, it is a clue, and in Paris we shall find the next act. The Channel crossing was mercifully smooth, though Hastings grumbled about the early hour. By noon, they were in Paris. The city's familiar bustle of horse-drawn carriages, motor cars, and street vendors, a stark contrast to the shadowy purpose of their visit. Poirot, ever fastidious, led them to a discreet hotel near the Seine, its faded elegance suiting their need for anonymity. "We must be shadows ourselves, Hastings," Poirot murmured as they checked in under assumed names. The Big Four have eyes everywhere. Their destination, the Chateau des Ombres, lay on the outskirts of Paris, a crumbling relic of the Ancien Regime nestled in a grove of gnarled oaks. The telegram had mentioned a meeting at midnight, and Poirot's inquiries through his network of informants, waiters, cab drivers, and a particularly talkative florist confirmed that the chateau had been rented by a mysterious group for a single night. "A gathering of vipers," Poirot mused, his eyes gleaming with anticipation. As dusk fell, Poirot and Hastings donned disguises. Poirot, with his flair for the dramatic, transformed into a stooped antiquarian, complete with a false beard and spectacles, while Hastings, less convincingly, posed as his assistant, a tweed cap pulled low over his brow. "I feel ridiculous," Hastings muttered, adjusting the cap. "Ridicule is a small price for survival," Poirot replied, his voice low. "The Big Four do not invite guests, they eliminate them." The chateau loomed against the moonlit sky, its turrets jagged like broken teeth. They approached through the woods, avoiding the main road where a single carriage stood, its driver obscured in shadow. A faint glow flickered from the chateau's upper windows, and the distant hum of voices carried on the wind. Poirot motioned for silence, his gloved hand steady as he led Hastings to a side entrance, its lock yielding to his nimble fingers, and a hairpin pilfered from the hotel-maid dot inside. The air was musty, thick with the scent of old wood and wax. The corridors were a maze of faded tapestries and cracked mirrors, but Poirot moved with the certainty of a bloodhound. They crept toward the grand hall, where the murmur of voices grew distinct. Peering through a gap in the heavy velvet curtains, they saw a dozen figures seated around a long table, their faces half hidden by the dim light of a chandelier. At the head sat a man whose presence commanded the room, a slight figure with sharp, angular features and eyes that gleamed like polished obsidian. His voice, soft yet piercing, carried an accent that Hastings couldn't place. "Li Chang Yen," Poirot whispered, his tone a mix of admiration and caution. "The first of the Big Four. A mind as brilliant as it is dangerous." The discussion at the table was chilling in its precision. Li Chang Yen spoke of collapsing economies, sowing discord among nations, and manipulating markets through a network of operatives. "The world is a chessboard," he said, his fingers steepled, "and we are its masters. The London incident was but a spark. Tomorrow, we ignite the flame." Hastings felt a chill, recalling the assassination attempt in Soho. The masked assailant had vanished into the fog, but the jade figurine dropped in the struggle had led them here. Poirot's eyes narrowed as he listened, memorizing every word, every gesture. Then, disaster struck. A floorboard creaked under Hastings' foot, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the silence. Heads turned. Li Changyen's gaze locked onto the curtains, and with a single gesture, two burly men rose, drawing pistols. "Run," Poirot hissed, grabbing Hastings' arm. They bolted down the corridor, footsteps pounding behind them. The labyrinthian layout became their ally as Poirot darted through side passages, doubling back to confuse their pursuers. "The catacombs," he gasped, spotting a rusted grate in the floor. They descended into the damp, claustrophobic tunnels beneath the chateau, the air heavy with the stench of mold. The catacombs, a relic of Paris's darker history, stretched for miles, their walls lined with skulls and bones. The pursuers' footsteps echoed above, then faded, but Poirot urged haste. "They will not give up so easily," he said, his breath steady despite the pace. The chase was relentless. Lanterns flickered in the distance as their enemies closed. In their shouts bouncing off the stone, Poirot, ever resourceful, spotted a narrow alcove and pulled Hastings inside, covering them with his dark cloak to blend into the shadows. The pursuers passed, cursing in a mix of languages: French, Russian, and something harsher, perhaps German. When the danger subsided, Poirot emerged, his eyes scanning the tunnel. "We must find the surface," he said, "but first, we take something from them." He led Hastings to a hidden chamber, its entrance concealed behind a loose stone. Inside they found a small safe, its lock no match for Poirot's deft hands. Within was a ledger, its pages filled with coded symbols and numbers. "The heart of their plan," Poirot murmured, slipping it into his coat. "Now, mon ami, we vanish." Their escape was a masterclass in misdirection. Poirot, shedding his antiquarian disguise, donned a worker's cap and smudged his face with dirt, posing as a maintenance worker. Hastings, less adept, followed his lead, mumbling in broken French to a passing guard who barely glanced their way. They emerged into the Paris dawn, the city waking unaware of the danger they had uncovered. Back at their hotel, Poirot pored over the ledger, his brow furrowed in concentration. "This is no simple cipher," he said, tracing the symbols with a pencil, "but it will yield its secrets to Hercule Poirot." Hastings, exhausted but exhilarated, watched as the detective worked, the jade figurine glinting on the table beside him. The Big Four's plan was vast, its tendrils reaching across continents, but Poirot's resolve was unshakable. As the sun rose over the Seine, casting golden light through the window, Poirot looked up, his eyes alight with determination. "The game has begun, Hastings," he said. "And in this game, the Big Four shall find that Hercule Poirot is no pawn." The ledger's code consumed Poirot's attention for the next 2 days. He sat at a small desk in their hotel room, surrounded by sheets of paper scribbled with numbers, letters, and cryptic diagrams. Hastings, restless, paced the room, occasionally peering out the window for signs of pursuit. The Paris streets seemed deceptively calm, but the memory of the chateau's shadowy figures lingered like a storm cloud. "Poirot, shouldn't we alert the authorities?" Hastings asked on the second evening, his voice tinged with frustration. "This big for business, it's too big for us alone." Poirot's mustache twitched, a sign of mild reproach. "The authorities, mon ami, they are good men, but slow, like a cart horse plodding through mud. This requires finesse, precision, the work of the little grey cells. Besides, the Big Four have spies everywhere. Trust no one, as the telegram warned." Hastings sighed, sinking into an armchair. "But what's the plan? We can't just sit here decoding forever." Poirot held up a hand, his eyes gleaming. "Patience, Hastings. The ledger is a map, and I am close to reading it. See here." He pointed to a sequence of numbers interspersed with Chinese characters. "This is no ordinary code. It is a blend of mathematics and linguistics, a puzzle designed to defy all but the most brilliant minds." Fortunately, Poirot is such a mind. By midnight he had cracked it. The ledger revealed a plan to sabotage the Orient Express, a symbol of international unity and a vital artery of commerce. The Big Four intended to plant an explosive device on the train, timed to detonate during a journey through the Alps, plunging Europe into chaos and blaming a rival nation to spark conflict. The next train was scheduled to depart in 3 days, and Poirot's jaw tightened as he read the details. "We must act swiftly," he said. "The Orient Express awaits, and so does destiny." The journey to the Gare de l'Est was fraught with tension. Poirot, ever cautious, varied their route, taking obscure side streets and doubling back to ensure they weren't followed. At the station, the Orient Express gleamed under the gaslights, its polished cars a testament to luxury and engineering. Passengers bustled about, aristocrats in furs, businessmen with briefcases, and a few shadowy figures who caught Poirot's eye. "Observe, Hastings," he whispered as they boarded. "The game is afoot, and the players are all around us." Their compartment was modest but comfortable, with plush seats and a small table where Poirot spread out his notes. As the train pulled out of Paris, the The rhythm of the wheels lulled Hastings into a false sense of security, but Poirot remained vigilant. "The Big Four will have agents here," he said, his voice low. "We must blend in, yet watch everything." The dining car was a microcosm of Europe's elite. A Russian countess, her diamonds sparkling, held court at one table, while an American tycoon, his voice booming, discussed steel markets with a nervous Frenchman. Poirot, disguised as a Belgian diplomat, engaged in polite conversation, his ears attuned to every nuance. Hastings, playing the role of his aide, struggled to keep up, his honest face betraying his unease. Dinner was interrupted by a scream from the next car. The passengers froze as a steward rushed in, his face pale. "A man's been found dead," he stammered. Poirot was on his feet in an instant, his eyes sharp. "Show me," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. The victim was a middle-aged man, slumped in his compartment, a dagger in his chest. The window was open, the cold alpine air rushing in, and a single clue lay on the floor, a silk handkerchief embroidered with a dragon. Poirot's fingers traced the stitching, his mind racing. "The Big Four," he murmured. "This is their work, but it is also their mistake." The investigation was swift but meticulous. Poirot questioned the passengers, noting their alibis and mannerisms. The Countess was evasive, her eyes darting to the side. The tycoon was overly cooperative, his smile too wide. Hastings, assisting as best he could, felt out of his depth, but Poirot's confidence was unshakable. "The truth lies in the details," he said, examining the dagger's hilt, which bore a faint insignia circle with 4 spokes. By the time the train reached Munich, Poirot had pieced together the puzzle. The victim was an agent of the Big Four, killed to silence him after a disagreement. The handkerchief linked to the financier, the second member of the group, whose name appeared in the ledger as Monsieur R. Poirot's inquiries revealed that Monsieur R. was aboard, posing as the American tycoon. A confrontation in the dining car was avoided when Poirot, with a flourish, presented the handkerchief and the dagger to the train's security, ensuring the tycoon's detention without revealing their own involvement. As the train pulled into Istanbul, Poirot and Hastings disembarked. The financier's arrest a small victory, but not the end. In the victim's compartment, hidden in a false panel, Poirot found a note: "Shanghai. The dragon rises." He folded it carefully, his eyes distant. "The Big Four are bold," he said, "but they underestimate Hercule Poirot to Shanghai Hastings. The game grows more dangerous." The journey to Shanghai was a grueling affair, crossing continents and seas. Poirot, ever the planner, secured passage on a steamer, where he spent hours studying the ledger and the note. Hastings, meanwhile, marveled at the detective's stamina. "You don't sleep, do you?" he asked one evening, as the ship cut through the Indian Ocean. "Sleep, mon ami, is for those without purpose," Poirot replied, though his eyes betrayed a flicker of fatigue. "The Big Four do not rest, and neither shall we." Shanghai greeted them with a cacophony of rickshaws, merchants, and the scent of spices. The city was a labyrinth of narrow alleys and neon-lit boulevards, a perfect hiding place for the Big Four's operatives. The note's mention of the dragon led them to an opium den in the French concession, its entrance guarded by a hulking figure with a scarred face. Poirot, undeterred, slipped the guard a bribe, his French accent replaced by a flawless imitation of a local dialect. Inside, the air was thick with smoke, and shadowy figures lounged on cushions, their eyes glazed. Poirot's gaze swept the room, landing on a curtained alcove where a man in a silk suit sat, his back to them. "Monsieur," Poirot whispered, recognizing the financier from the train. But before they could approach, a woman emerged from the shadows, her beauty as striking as it was dangerous, her eyes, sharp and calculating, locked onto Poirot's. "The femme fatale," Poirot murmured to Hastings, "the third of the Big Four." She introduced herself as Madame Chen, a scientist with a penchant for chemistry. Her voice was smooth, her words laced with menace. "You are far from home, monsieur," she said, her smile cold. "Shanghai, there's no place for amateurs." Poirot's mustache twitched, but his tone was polite. "And yet, madame, it is the perfect place for a mind such as mine." The confrontation escalated when Madame Chen signaled her guards. A fight broke out, with Hastings fending off attackers while Poirot slipped into the alcove, where he found a hidden door leading to a laboratory. Inside, vats of chemicals bubbled, and blueprints detailed a weapon capable of poisoning entire cities. Poirot's hands moved quickly, sabotaging the equipment with precise adjustments, ensuring it would fail spectacularly. The explosion rocked the den, sending patrons scrambling. Poirot and Hastings fled through a back alley, the financier and Madame Chen vanishing in the chaos. In the wreckage, Poirot found a map, its edges singed, pointing to Venice. "The game continues," he said, his voice steady despite the smoke in his lungs. Venice was a city of masks, and the masquerade ball at the Palazzo Ducale was the perfect stage for the Big Four's next move. Poirot, dressed as a Venetian noble, and Hastings, in a less convincing harlequin costume, blended into the crowd of revelers. The air was thick with perfume and intrigue, the chandeliers casting flickering shadows on gilded walls. The fourth member, a master of disguise, was there. "Target," Poirot's eyes scanned the crowd, noting every detail, the way a masked figure lingered near the balcony, the glint of a knife under a cloak. When a world leader, attending incognito, was targeted, Poirot acted swiftly, orchestrating a distraction. With a dropped glass and a shouted warning, the assassin fled, but not before Poirot glimpsed a tattoo on his wrist, a circle with 4 spokes. The chase through Venice's canals was a blur of gondolas and moonlight. Poirot, with Hastings at his side, pursued the figure, their boat cutting through the water. At a deserted piazza, the master of disguise was cornered, his mask falling to reveal a face Poirot recognized from the chateau. "You are clever," the man sneered, "but not clever enough." Poirot's smile was serene. "On the contrary, mon ami, it is you who have been outplayed." With the assassin apprehended and the leader safe, Poirot found a new clue in the man's Paquita letter mentioning a castle in Scotland. "The Big Four grow desperate," he said, as they boarded a train north. "Their net tightens, but so does ours." The Scottish castle was a fortress of stone and secrets, its halls lined with suits of armor and traps. Poirot and Hastings navigated its dangers, uncovering a propaganda campaign designed to sow discord. Mercenaries guarded the castle, but Poirot's knowledge of its ancient mechanisms, levers hidden in fireplaces, secret passages behind tapestries, turned the tide. The mercenaries were defeated, and a captured document revealed the Big Four's headquarters in Vienna. In Vienna, the opera house was a glittering stage for their next move. Li Changyen's presence was a surprise. His cunning nearly outmatching Poirot's. A chase through the sewers tested their resolve, but Poirot's quick thinking saved them. The evidence they secured pointed to Egypt, where the Big Four's final weapon waited. The desert stronghold was a tomb of sand and steel, where Madame Chun's catastrophic weapon was nearly complete. A betrayal by an ally, a man Hastings had trusted, nearly cost them everything, but Poirot's deduction unmasked the traitor. The raid was daring, the weapon destroyed, and the tomb collapsed as they fled. A map to New York, their only reward. In New York, the skyscraper showdown was a clash of wits and will. The financier and the master of disguise fell, but Li Changyen escaped, his vow of revenge echoing in the night. Poirot, undeterred, planned the final trap, luring the Big Four to a manor in England. There, his intellect triumphed, the scientists' treachery exposed and the conspiracy dismantled. As Poirot and Hastings sipped tea in the manor's garden, the world safe once more. Poirot smiled. "The little grey cells, Hastings," he said, "they never fail." Chapter 3. The Code of the Orient. Hercule Poirot adjusted his impeccable tie, the crisp London air brushing against his face as he stood outside his modest yet elegant apartment on Whitehaven Mansions. The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestone street, and the faint hum of the city stirred his senses. Captain Arthur Hastings, ever the loyal companion, stood beside him, clutching the coded ledger they had retrieved from Paris. Its leather cover was worn, its pages filled with cryptic symbols that had kept Poirot awake through the night. His little grey cells working tirelessly to unravel its secrets, "Mon ami," Poirot said, his voice calm but tinged with excitement. "This ledger is the key. The Big Four, they are no mere criminals. Their ambition is vast, their reach global. But Hercule Poirot will not be outwitted by shadows." Hastings, face flushed with the thrill of their recent escape from the Parisian catacombs, nodded. "It's a devilish puzzle, Poirot. Those symbols, numbers, letters, and what looked like Chinese characters. Do you think you've cracked it?" Poirot's mustache twitched, a faint smile playing at the corners of his lips. "Patience, Hastings. The mind of Poirot is like a fine watch, precise, methodical. The code will yield its secrets, but we must proceed with care. The Big Four are watching." Inside his apartment, Poirot spread the ledger across a polished mahogany table, its pages illuminated by a single lamp. The symbols were a chaotic blend of numerals, Latin letters, and ideograms that seemed to defy logic. Hastings hovered, his impatience palpable, as Poirot traced a finger over the lines, muttering to himself in French. "Regard us, Hastings," Poirot said after an hour of silent study. "The numbers repeat in a pattern, 3s and 7s, always in groups. The letters, to form anagrams, but the ideograms, they are the key. They are not random. They point to a location, a time, and a target." Hastings leaned closer, squinting at the page. "A location? You mean a city?" "Oui, but not just any city. The Orient Express." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "The ledger speaks of a sabotage, a disruption of the most famous train in the world. The Big Four intend to strike at its heart, to sow chaos among the elite who travel its routes. We must board the train, Hastings, and uncover their plan before it is too late." The decision was made swiftly. Poirot, with his characteristic efficiency, secured 2 first-class tickets for the Orient Express departing from London's Victoria Station the following evening. Hastings packed a small valise, his military instincts kicking in, while Poirot fussed over the selection of his walking stick, insisting it was essential for the psychology of the investigation. The platform at Victoria Station bustled with activity as porters hauled trunks and passengers in fur coats and tailored suits exchanged farewells. The Orient Express, its deep blue carriages gleaming under the station's gaslights, stood like a monument to luxury and adventure. Poirot, in a perfectly tailored overcoat, surveyed the scene with sharp eyes, noting every detail: the nervous glance of a porter, the hurried step of a woman in a veiled hat, the overly polished shoes of a man lingering near the ticket booth. Suspicion, Hastings, Poirot murmured. It is in the air. The Big Four have eyes everywhere. We must be vigilant. They boarded the train, settling into a plush compartment adorned with polished wood and velvet curtains. The gentle sway of the carriage and the rhythmic clatter of wheels on tracks created an almost hypnotic atmosphere. But Poirot remained alert, his mind racing. Hastings, less accustomed to such luxury, marveled at the opulence. His fingers brushing the silk upholstery. Dashed fine way to travel, Poirot, he said, grinning. Though I suppose you're used to this sort of thing. Poirot raised an eyebrow. Comfort, mon ami, is a tool, not a distraction. We are here to observe, to deduce, to prevent disaster. The Big Four do not choose their targets lightly. The Orient Express is a stage, and we must watch the players closely. As the train pulled out of London, bound for Calais, and then across Europe, Poirot and Hastings began their investigation. The dining car was their first stop, a glittering space filled with crystal glassware and the murmur of multilingual conversation. Poirot's eyes darted from face to face, cataloguing every gesture, every glance. Hastings, less subtle, scanned the room openly, earning a gentle nudge from his friend. Discretion, Hastings, Poirot whispered. We are not hunting elephants. Observe, but do not be observed. Among the passengers, two figures stood out immediately. The first was Countess Vera Rosikoff, a striking Russian émigré with auburn hair and a laugh that carried across the car. Her emerald necklace sparkled under the chandeliers, and her eyes, sharp and knowing, lingered on Poirot for a moment too long. The second was Mr. Cornelius Vanderbilt III, an American tycoon with a penchant for cigars and a guarded demeanor. His broad shoulders and clipped speech suggested a man accustomed to power, but his frequent glances at his pocket watch betrayed unease. Interesting, then, Poirot said, sipping a glass of mineral water. The Countess, she is too charming, too deliberate, and Monsieur Vanderbilt, he is hiding something. We shall see. Dinner passed without incident, but Poirot's instincts were on edge. As they returned to their compartment, a scream pierced the night, echoing through the train's corridors. Hastings leaped to his feet, his hand instinctively reaching for a revolver he no longer carried, while Poirot moved with surprising agility, his walking stick tapping the floor. The source of the scream was a compartment 3 doors down. A crowd had gathered, and a pale-faced steward stood guard, his hands trembling. Inside, a man lay sprawled across the floor, his throat cut, a pool of blood staining the carpet. The victim was identified as Monsieur Dupont, a French diplomat known for his work on international trade agreements. Mon Dieu, Poirot muttered, kneeling beside the body. His gloved fingers examined the scene with surgical precision. The cut is clean, professional. This is no act of passion. This is the work of the Big Four. Hastings, shaken but determined, scanned the compartment. No sign of a struggle, Poirot. The killer was quick, but why Dupont? What's the connection? Poirot's eyes narrowed as he lifted a small object from the floor, a cufflink engraved with a stylized number 4. The Big Four leave their mark. Hastings. This man was a target, but not the endgame. The sabotage of the Orient Express is tied to his death. We must find the killer before they strike again. The train's staff, anxious to maintain order, allowed Poirot to take charge of the investigation. Recognizing his reputation, he interrogated the passengers, beginning with the Countess. She was composed, her answers polished, but Poirot noted the slight tremor in her hand as she lit a cigarette. I knew Monsieur Dupont only in passing, she said, her Russian accent thick. A charming man, but we spoke only of trivial things. Such a tragedy. Poirot smiled politely, his mind cataloguing her every word. And yet, madame, your eyes, they see more than you say. Perhaps you will recall something useful now. Vanderbilt was less cooperative, his answers curt. I was in the smoking car all evening, he said, puffing on a cigar. Didn't see Dupont, didn't hear a thing. You're wasting your time, Mr. Poirot. But Poirot was undeterred. He examined the crime scene again, noting the absence of the murder weapon and the faint scent of a chemical ether perhaps in the air. The cufflink, he deduced, was a deliberate clue, meant to taunt him. The Big Four were playing a game, and Poirot was their opponent as the train crossed into Germany. Poirot gathered the passengers in the dining car, his demeanor calm but commanding. Mesdames et messieurs, he began, his voice cutting through the murmurs. A murderer is among us. But fear not, Hercule Poirot will bring them to justice. I ask for your cooperation, and I assure you, the truth will be revealed. The passengers exchanged uneasy glances, but Poirot's presence was magnetic, his confidence unshakable. He spent the next hours observing, questioning, and piecing together the puzzle. Hastings, ever loyal, followed his lead, though he admitted to feeling out of his depth. It's like chasing ghosts, Poirot, he said, as they sat in their compartment late that night. The Countess, Vanderbilt, the other passengers, any of them could be working for the Big Four, or none of them, Poirot replied, his eyes fixed on the ledger which he had brought with him. "The answer lies here, Hastings. The code. This is not just about the sabotage. It names the second member of the Big Four, and I believe I have found them." He pointed to a line in the ledger, where a sequence of numbers and letters had been decoded to form a name: Cornelius Vanderbilt. 3. The tycoon, Poirot explained, was not merely a passenger but a financier with ties to global markets, a perfect candidate for the Big Four's ruthless ambitions. "But how do we prove it?" Hastings asked, his voice low. "We can't just accuse him without evidence." "Evidence, mon ami, is in the details," Poirot said. "The cufflink, the ether, the timing of the murder, they all point to him. But we must be clever. The Big Four are not fools. We will set a trap." The plan was simple yet daring. Poirot arranged for a rumor to spread among the passengers that he had uncovered the killer's identity and would reveal it at dinner. The following evening, he instructed the steward to serve a specific wine, laced with a mild sedative, to Vanderbilt's table. The trap was set. As the train neared Istanbul, the dining car was tense, the passengers' eyes darting nervously. Vanderbilt, unaware of the sedative, drank deeply, his movements growing sluggish. Poirot watched, his expression unreadable, as the tycoon excused himself and stumbled toward his compartment. "Now, Hastings," Poirot whispered, "we follow." They trailed Vanderbilt, who, in his disoriented state, led them to a hidden compartment beneath his seat. Inside was a dossier detailing the sabotage plan, a bomb rigged to derail the Orient Express at a critical junction, destabilizing trade routes and economies. The cufflink, Poirot noted, matched one Vanderbilt wore, confirming his guilt. Confronted, Vanderbilt sneered, his facade crumbling. "You're too late, Poirot," he slurred. "The Big Four are unstoppable. You've won nothing." But Poirot was prepared. With the steward's help, he disarmed the bomb, a complex device hidden in the train's undercarriage. Vanderbilt was restrained, his role as the second member of the Big Four exposed. Passengers, unaware of the danger they had escaped, applauded Poirot's brilliance as the train pulled into Istanbul's Sakechi station. Yet the victory was bittersweet. As Poirot and Hastings disembarked, a porter slipped a note into Poirot's hand. It was a single sheet of paper, written in the same coded script as the ledger, with a single word: Shanghai. "The game continues, Hastings," Poirot said, his eyes narrowing. "The Big Four are not finished, but neither is Hercule Poirot." The platform buzzed with activity as they stepped into the warm Istanbul evening, the city's minarets silhouetted against the sky. Poirot's mind was already racing, planning their next move. The Orient Express had been saved, but the Big Four's reach extended far beyond the train. Shanghai awaited, and with it, the next chapter of their deadly conspiracy. The journey to Shanghai would be long, and Poirot knew the stakes were higher than ever. The ledger, now partially decoded, hinted at a larger plan of manipulation of global trade routes that could plunge nations into chaos. The third member of the Big Four, a femme fatale scientist, was their next target, and Poirot sensed she would be even more formidable than Vanderbilt. That as they boarded a steamer bound for the east, Poirot sat in his cabin, the ledger open before him. Hastings, exhausted but resolute, watched his friend with admiration. "You're a marvel, Poirot," he said. "How do you do it? All those clues, all those details, how do you keep it all straight?" Poirot smiled, his mustache twitching. "The little gray cells, Hastings, they never fail me. And now, we go to Shanghai, where the next piece of the puzzle awaits. The Big Four think they are playing chess with the world, but they have not reckoned with Hercule Poirot, the master of checkmate." The steamer's horns sounded, signaling their departure. The sea stretched endlessly before them, a vast expanse of mystery and danger. Poirot closed the ledger, his mind already turning to the challenges ahead. The Big Four were a formidable foe, but Poirot was undaunted. The truth, he knew, was always within reach, if one only knew where to look. And so, as the Orient Express faded into memory, Poirot and Hastings sailed toward Shanghai, their resolve unbroken, their mission clear. The Big Four's conspiracy was far from over, but Poirot's little gray cells were just beginning to unravel its secrets. Chapter 4: Shadows in Shanghai. The air in Shanghai was thick with the scent of jasmine and coal smoke, a heady blend that clung to the back of Poirot's throat as he stepped off the steamer onto the bustling docks of the Huangpu River. The city pulsed with life. Rickshaws clattered over cobblestones, vendors hawked steaming baozi, and the distant clang of tram bells echoed through the humid evening. Hercule Poirot, impeccable in his tailored suit despite the oppressive heat, adjusted his hat and cast a sharp glance at Captain Hastings, who mopped his brow with a handkerchief. "Mon ami," Poirot said, his voice calm but laced with urgency. "Shanghai's a city of shadows, where secrets hide in every alley. We must tread with care, for the Big Four have eyes everywhere." Hastings nodded, his face flushed from the journey. "That ledger you decoded pointed us here, Poirot, but I can't shake the feeling we're walking into a trap. This financier chap, number 2 of their lot, sounds like a slippery devil." "Slippery, yes, but not invincible," Poirot replied, his eyes gleaming with determination. "The Big Four believe they control the board, but Hercule Poirot plays a different game. Come, we must find this opium den the ledger mentioned. It is there we shall find our next thread. The duo navigated the chaotic Bund, where European-style buildings loomed over the waterfront, their neoclassical facades juxtaposed against the frenetic energy of the Chinese streets beyond. The ledger, painstakingly deciphered by Poirot during sleepless nights in London, had revealed a cryptic reference to the Dragon's Breath, a notorious opium den in Shanghai's underworld. It was linked to the Big Four's second member, a financier known only as the Shadow Broker, whose wealth and influence manipulated global trade routes like a puppeteer pulling strings. Their first stop was a discreet tea house recommended by one of Poirot's old contacts from his days with the Belgian police. The tea house, tucked behind a narrow alley draped with drying laundry, was a haven of polished wood and flickering lanterns. An elderly woman, her face etched with lines like a map of her years, greeted them with a knowing nod. Poirot slipped her a few coins and murmured a name, Madame Wu. The woman's eyes narrowed, but she gestured to a low table in the corner. Madame Wu knows many things, she said in halting English, but she does not meet strangers lightly. What do you offer? Poirot produced the jade figurine from his pocket, its intricate carving catching the lantern light. Show her this, he said softly. She will understand. Minutes later they were ushered through a hidden door behind a tapestry, descending a spiral staircase into a subterranean chamber. The air grew heavy with incense, and the faint strains of a pipa drifted through the gloom. Madame Wu awaited them, seated on a cushioned divan, her silk robe shimmering like liquid night, her eyes, sharp as a hawk's, fixed on the figurine. In Poirot's hand. You come from far, little man, she said, her voice a low purr. That jade is no trinket. It bears the mark of the Dragon's Breath. Why do you seek it? Poirot bowed slightly, his mustache twitching. Madame, I seek the one who trades in shadows, the one who moves gold and goods across borders like a ghost. I believe you know where to find him. Madame Wu's lips curled into a faint smile. You speak of dangerous men, Mr. Poirot. The Shadow Broker does not meet those who ask too many questions. But the Dragon's Breath is not far. Follow the lantern with the red tassel in the French concession. Be there at midnight, and do not linger in the open. As they left the tea house, Hastings whispered, Can we trust her? This feels like a setup. Trust Hastings. Nan, we trust no one, but we follow the clues, for they are all we have. The Big Four are bold, but they are not infallible. Their arrogance will be their undoing. The French concession was a world apart from the gritty docks, a maze of tree-lined streets, elegant villas and cafes spilling laughter into the night. Yet beneath its polished veneer, the district thrummed with danger. Poirot and Hastings followed Madame Wu's directions, their footsteps muffled by the damp cobblestones. At precisely midnight, they spotted the lantern with the red tassel swaying outside a nondescript door in a narrow alley. Poirot knocked twice, then once more, as instructed. The door creaked open, revealing a hulking figure in a black suit, his face obscured by a wide-brimmed hat. Password, he growled. Dragon's Breath, Poirot said smoothly, his voice betraying no hint of the tension coiling in his chest. The man stepped aside, and they entered a dimly lit corridor that smelled of opium and decay. The den itself was a cavernous space, its walls draped with crimson silk, and its air thick with sweet cloying smoke. Men and women lounged on low couches, their eyes glassy, while shadowy figures moved among them, exchanging whispers and small packages. Poirot's gaze swept the room, cataloguing every detail: the glint of a gold watch, the flicker of a hidden blade, the nervous tick of a man in the corner. There, he murmured to Hastings, nodding toward a curtained alcove at the far end. Our financier awaits. They approached cautiously, weaving through the haze. Behind the curtain, a man sat at a lacquered table, his fingers drumming a rhythm only he could hear. He was lean, with sharp cheekbones and eyes that glittered like polished obsidian. A ledger, identical in style to the one from Paris, lay open before him, its pages filled with numbers and cryptic symbols. You were bold to come here, the man said without looking up. Hercule Poirot, I presume. The Big Four have heard of your meddling. Poirot inclined his head unruffled. And you, monsieur, must be the Shadow Broker. Your reputation precedes you. But I wonder, does your confidence match your skill, or is it merely a The man's smile was cold. You think you can outwit us? The Big Four are beyond your reach. Our plans are in motion, and no little Belgian detective will stop them. Before Poirot could respond, a soft click echoed behind them. Hastings spun, his hand reaching for the revolver he carried, but it was too late. The curtain parted, and a woman stepped forward, her presence commanding the room. She was striking tall, with raven hair cascading over a crimson kipo, her eyes alight with a dangerous intelligence. In her hand was a sleek pistol, its barrel trained on Poirot. Number 3, Poirot said, his voice steady despite the threat. The scientist, I presume. Your reputation for chemical ingenuity is most impressive. She tilted her head, studying him. You're clever, Poirot. Too clever, perhaps, but cleverness won't save you now. The Shadow Broker and I have business to conclude, and you are an inconvenience. Hastings shifted, ready to act. but Poirot raised a hand, his eyes never leaving the woman. An inconvenience, perhaps, but one who holds a piece of your puzzle. The jade figurine, it not belong to your organization. Tell me, mademoiselle, what is its purpose? Her smile faltered, just for a moment. You know nothing of our purpose, she said, but there was a flicker of doubt in her gaze. The Big Four will reshape the world, and you will not stand in our way. What followed was a blur of motion. Hastings, seizing the moment, lunged for the scientist's pistol, knocking it from her hand. The shadow broker sprang to his feet, drawing a concealed blade, but Poirot was faster. With a flick of his cane, he tripped the financier, sending him sprawling. The den erupted into chaos as patrons scrambled, and armed guards poured in from hidden doors. Run, Hastings, Poirot shouted, grabbing the ledger from the table. They bolted through a side door, the scientist's furious cries echoing behind them. The alley outside was a labyrinth, its walls closing in as footsteps pounded in pursuit. Poirot, despite his fastidious nature, plunged into the darkness, his mind racing as he navigated the twisting paths. They emerged into a crowded market, the air alive with the clatter of stalls and the shouts of vendors. Poirot pulled Hastings into the shadow of a noodle cart, his breath steady despite the chase. The ledger, Hastings, he said, clutching it tightly. It is the key. We must find a safe place to study it. They found refuge in a small boarding house, its owner, a discreet ally of Madame Wu. In the flickering light of an oil lamp, Poirot pored over the ledger's pages, his fingers tracing the coded entries. Mon Dieu, he murmured after hours of work, this is no mere financial record. It details a plan to disrupt global trade shipping routes, tariffs, even sabotage of key ports. And there is more. A reference to a laboratory, hidden beneath the city. Hastings frowned. A laboratory? What are they cooking up now? Something catastrophic, Poirot said grimly. The scientist number 3, she is no ordinary chemist. Her work could threaten entire nations. We must find this laboratory, Hastings, and we must act quickly. Their search led them to the edges of Shanghai's old city, where ancient stone walls hid modern secrets. Following a trail of cryptic clues from the Lajura series of coordinates disguised as shipping manifests, they located a hidden entrance beneath a derelict temple. The door, concealed behind a statue of Guanyan, opened into a tunnel that descended into the earth. The laboratory was a marvel of forbidden science. Vials of glowing liquid lined the walls, and strange machines hummed with unnatural energy. At its center stood the scientist, her crimson kipo replaced by a white coat, her hands manipulating a complex apparatus. She turned as they entered, her expression one of cold amusement. You are persistent, Poirot, she said, gesturing to a glass container filled with a swirling green mist. But you are too late. This compound, once released, will paralyze economies, disrupt trade, and sow chaos. The Big Four's vision will be realized. Poirot's eyes narrowed. Your vision is one of destruction, mademoiselle, but you underestimate the power of order, of reason. Your machine, it has a flaw, does it not? A single miscalculation in the pressure valves. Her face paled, and Poirot seized the moment. With a swift motion, he grabbed a wrench from a nearby table and struck a critical valve, sending sparks flying. The scientist screamed, lunging for a control panel, but Hastings tackled her to the ground. Alarms blared as the laboratory began to shudder, pipes hissing and machines sparking. Out, Hastings, Poirot cried, dragging his friend toward the exit. They scrambled through the tunnel as explosions rocked the chamber behind them, the ground trembling under their feet. They emerged into the night air just as the temple collapsed, sealing the laboratory's secrets beneath tons of rubble. Panting, Poirot clutched the ledger, now singed but intact. We have dealt a blow to the Big Four, he said, his voice steady despite the chaos. But this is not the end. The ledger mentions a map to their next target, Venice. Hastings, we must go to Venice. As they vanished into the Shanghai night, the city's pulse seemed to quicken, as if aware of the battle that had unfolded in its shadows. Poirot's mind was already racing ahead, piecing together the next move in this deadly game of chess. The Big Four were wounded, but they were far from defeated. And Hercule Poirot would not rest until their conspiracy was undone. The journey to Venice promised new dangers, new disguises, and a masquerade that would test even Poirot's unparalleled intellect. But for now they had survived the shadows of Shanghai, and that was victory enough. Chapter 5. The Venetian Masquerade. The gondola glided silently through the misty canals of Venice, its sleek black hull cutting through the water like a knife through silk. Hercule Poirot sat at the stern, his gloved hands folded neatly over the handle of his cane, his sharp eyes scanning the shadowy facades of the ancient palazzos that loomed on either side. The air was heavy with the scent of salt water and history, and the distant strains of a violin drifted from some unseen courtyard, mingling with the soft lapping of the waves. Beside him, Captain Hastings fidgeted, adjusting his mask for the third time in as many minutes. Poirot, Hastings whispered, his voice muffled by the ornate silver mask that covered half his face. Are you certain this is wise? Infiltrating a masquerade ball hosted by who knows who, chasing a phantom we've only heard whispers about. It feels like we're walking into a trap. Poirot's mustache twitched, a faint smile playing beneath it. Mon ami, a trap is only dangerous if one does not expect it, and Hercule Poirot always expects. The Big Four. They think themselves clever, but they do not yet understand the mind of Poirot. This ball, it is their stage, and we shall be the unexpected players. The gondola slowed as it approached the Grand Palazzo, its marble steps descending into the canal like an invitation. Torches flickered along the entrance, casting golden reflections on the water, and masked figures in elaborate costumes drifted through the arched doorway, their laughter echoing into the night. Poirot adjusted his own mask, a sleek black affair that accentuated the intensity of his gaze, and stepped onto the steps with the grace of a man half his age. Hastings followed, his broad shoulders stiff with unease. The interior of the palazzo was a vision of opulence. Crystal chandeliers hung from gilded ceilings, their light refracting off mirrored walls and polished marble floors. Guests swirled through the grand ballroom, their costumes a riot of color and decadence, harlequins in diamond-patterned silks, courtiers in powdered wigs, and mysterious figures cloaked in velvet and lace. A string quartet played a lively waltz, and waiters in powdered masks wove through the crowd, offering flutes of champagne. Poirot's eyes darted from face to face, though the masks made identification impossible. The fourth member of the Big Four, he murmured to Hastings, the master of disguise, is here. I feel it in my bones. We must be vigilant, for they are as slippery as the eels in these canals. Their mission was clear, thanks to the clue unearthed in Shanghai, a cryptic note mentioning a masquerade in Venice, where the Big Four's fourth member would orchestrate the assassination of a world leader attending the ball. The identity of the target remained unknown, but Poirot had deduced that the event was tied to a secret diplomatic summit occurring under the guise of the festivities. The stakes were astronomical, and failure was not an option. As they moved through the crowd, Poirot's mind worked like a finely tuned machine. He noted the way a tall figure in a crimson cape lingered near a doorway, the subtle bulge of a concealed weapon beneath a jester's motley, the nervous glance of a woman in a peacock-feathered mask as she whispered to her companion. Every detail was a thread in the tapestry of the conspiracy, and Poirot was determined to unravel it. "Stay close, Hastings," he said softly, his voice barely audible over the music. "We must find the leader before the assassin strikes. Look for someone who commands attention, someone the room orbits around." Hastings nodded, though his eyes betrayed his discomfort. "How do we even know who we're looking for? Everyone's masked, and half the people here look like they're up to no good." "Precisement," Poirot replied, his tone almost cheerful. "It is in the chaos that we find clarity. Observe, mon ami. The guilty, they always reveal themselves, even when they think they are hidden." They drifted toward the center of the ballroom, where a grand staircase led to a mezzanine overlooking the festivities. Poirot's gaze settled on a figure standing at the top of the stairs, a man in a golden lion mask, his black velvet cloak adorned with intricate embroidery. He stood with an air of authority, his posture commanding, as if the room belonged to him. Guests approached him deferentially, bowing or offering brief words before retreating. "There," Poirot said, his voice low but firm. "That is our man, or one of them. Come, Hastings, let us pay our respects." They ascended the staircase, weaving through the crowd with practiced ease. Poirot's cane tapped lightly on the marble steps, a rhythmic counterpoint to the waltz. Below, as they neared the man in the lion mask, Poirot adopted an air of casual curiosity, his head tilted as if admiring the man's costume. "Bonsoir, Monsieur," Poirot said, his French accent deliberately exaggerated. "Your mask, it is magnificent. The lion, he is the king of the jungle. Nan, a fitting choice for such a grand occasion." The man turned, his eyes glinting through the slits of his mask. "You flatter me, sir," he replied, his voice smooth and cultured, with a hint of an unplaceable accent. "And your mask simple yet elegant. A man who values discretion, I presume." Poirot chuckled, his eyes never leaving the man's. "Discretion is a virtue, monsieur, but so is perception. Tell me, do you come to Venice often for such festivities, or is this a special occasion?" The man's lips curved into a smile, but there was no warmth in it. "Oh, this is indeed special, a night of masks and secrets, where anything is possible. Wouldn't you agree?" "Quite," Poirot said, his tone light but his mind racing. The man's words were laced with double meaning, and Poirot sensed the game had begun. "Perhaps you might indulge a stranger with a tour of this splendid palazzo. I am new to Venice and eager to learn its secrets." The man hesitated, his eyes narrowing slightly, but before he could respond, a commotion erupted below. A woman's scream cut through the music, and the crowd parted to reveal a figure slumped on the floor, a dagger protruding from their chest. Gasps rippled through the ballroom as the music faltered, and Poirot's heart sank. The assassination had begun, or so it seemed. "Stay here," Poirot ordered Hastings, his voice sharp. He descended the stairs with surprising speed, his cane forgotten as he pushed through the crowd. The victim was a young man in a harlequin costume, his mask askew, revealing a pale, lifeless face. Poirot knelt beside him, his fingers brushing the dagger's hilt. It was ornate, Engraved with a symbol he recognized as stylized for, the mark of the Big Four. It is a diversion, Poirot muttered, his eyes scanning the room. The true target is still in play. Hastings caught up, his face pale. Poirot, is he dead? Oui, Poirot said grimly. But this is not our leader. This poor soul was a pawn sacrificed to draw attention. We must find the man in the lion mask. He is the key. They returned to the mezzanine, but the man in the golden lion mask was gone. Poirot's eyes narrowed as he scanned the crowd, his mind piecing together the puzzle. The diversion had given the assassin time to move, but where? His gaze fell on a side door leading to a terrace overlooking the canal, where a group of masked figures had gathered, their postures tense. There, Poirot said, grabbing Hastings' arm. Quickly, mon ami, they hurried toward the terrace, dodging dancers and waiters. The night air was cool as they stepped outside, the canal shimmering below. The group on the terrace included the man in the lion mask, now speaking urgently to a woman in a silver gown, her face hidden by a swan mask. Nearby, a third figure, a tall, broad-shouldered man in a black domino mask, stood with his hand inside his cloak, as if gripping a weapon. Poirot's mind raced. The woman in the swan mask carried herself with the poise of someone accustomed to power, perhaps the world leader they sought to protect. The man in the lion mask was likely the fourth member of the Big Four, the master of disguise, orchestrating the plot, and the man in the black domino, the assassin, poised to strike. Hastings, Poirot whispered, when I give the signal, you must tackle the man in the black domino. Do not hesitate. Hastings nodded, his jaw set. Poirot approached the group, his demeanor casual but his eyes sharp. Pardon, Madame et Messieurs, he said, his voice carrying a hint of amusement. I could not help but overhear your conversation. It seems you are discussing matters of great importance. The man in the lion mask turned, his smile tight. This is a private conversation, monsieur. I suggest you return to the ball. Oh, but I am so curious, Poirot said, stepping closer. And I have a talent for uncovering secrets. For example, I know that the man beside you intends to commit a grave act this very night. The man in the black domino stiffened, his hand emerging from his cloak with a glinting pistol. Before he could aim, Poirot raised his cane and struck the man's wrist, sending the weapon clattering to the ground. Hastings lunged, tackling the man to the terrace floor, pinning him as the crowd gasped. The woman in the swan mask stepped back, her hand at her throat, while the man in the lion mask bolted toward a gondola moored at the terrace's edge. Poirot was faster, his cane hooking the man's ankle, sending him sprawling. In a fluid motion, Poirot knelt and tore off the lion mask, revealing a face that was both unfamiliar and chillingly calculated, a face that seemed to shift even as they looked at it, as if the man's very features were a disguise. You, Poirot said, his voice triumphant. The master of disguise, the fourth of the Big Four. Your game is over. The man sneered, his voice low and venomous. You think you've won, Poirot? This is but a single move in a larger game. The Big Four will rise again. Guards from the palazzo, alerted by the commotion, swarmed the terrace, restraining the man in the black domino and the unmasked villain. The woman in the swan mask approached Poirot, her eyes wide with gratitude. You saved my life, she said, her voice trembling. I am in your debt. Poirot bowed, his mustache twitching. It is my duty, madame, but the night is not yet over. We must ensure your safety. As the guards escorted the prisoners away, Poirot and Hastings returned to the ballroom, where the festivities had resumed, albeit with a nervous edge. Poirot's mind was already racing ahead, piecing together the next step. The master of disguise had mentioned a larger game, and Poirot knew the Big Four were far from defeated. In a quiet corner of the palazzo, Poirot examined a scrap of paper he had found in the lion-masked man's pocket. It bore a single word, Scotland, a new clue, pointing to a remote castle in the Highlands. The chase was far from over, and Poirot's little grey cells were already at work, anticipating the next move in this deadly game of cat and mouse. The gondolas carried the guests back into the Venetian night. Poirot and Hastings boarded their own, the city's lights fading into the mist. The masquerade had been unmasked, but the true face of the Big Four remained elusive, and Poirot knew the road ahead would be fraught with danger. Chapter 6. The Highland Enigma. Wind howled across the Scottish moors, carrying with it the scent of damp heather and ancient stone. Hercule Poirot, wrapped in a heavy woolen coat, stood atop a rocky outcrop, his eyes fixed on the silhouette of Donmore Castle in the distance. Its jagged turrets pierced the grey sky like the teeth of some slumbering beast, its walls weathered by centuries of storms and secrets. Beside him, Captain Arthur Hastings shivered, pulling his scarf tighter around his neck. The journey from Venice had been arduous, and the cryptic clue they'd uncovered, a tattered parchment bearing the crest of a long-dead Highland clan, had led them here, to this remote corner of Scotland where the Big Four's shadow loomed, ever larger. Is it always this blasted cold in Scotland, Poirot? Hastings muttered, his breath visible in the chill air. I swear, my bones are rattling louder than that gondola chase in Venice. Poirot's moustache twitched, though whether from amusement or the cold was unclear. Mon ami, the cold sharpens the mind, and here, in this desolate place, we shall need all the sharpness we can muster. The Big Four, They do not choose their lairs lightly. This castle, it is no mere ruin, it is a fortress of secrets. The parchment, discovered in the aftermath of the Venetian masquerade, had been maddeningly vague, a single line in an archaic script: "Seek the eagle's nest where the lion sleeps." Poirot had deduced that Dunmore Castle, once home to the clan Mackinnon, was the eagle's nest, its crest featuring a soaring bird. The lion remained a mystery, though Poirot suspected it referred to a hidden chamber or relic within the castle's walls. The Big Four's fourth member, unmasked in Venice but still at large, had left this clue as a taunt, daring Poirot to pursue them into their next trap. The duo descended the rocky path toward the castle, their boots crunching against frost-covered stones. The moors stretched endlessly around them, a bleak expanse broken only by gnarled trees and the occasional cry of a distant bird. As they approached, the castle's gates loomed into view, iron-bound wood, pitted with rust but still imposing. A faint light flickered in one of the upper windows, a sign that the castle was not as abandoned as it appeared. Poirot, Hastings whispered, his hand straying to the revolver in his coat pocket. "Are we walking into another ambush? After Venice, I'm not keen on more surprises." Poirot's eyes gleamed with that familiar intensity. "An ambush, perhaps, but one we shall turn to our advantage." The Big Four, they underestimate Hercule Poirot. They believe their trap's infallible, but they forget every trap has a flaw, and I shall find it. The gates creaked open with a groan, revealing a courtyard overgrown with weeds. The castle's interior was no less forbidding, a grand hall with a vaulted ceiling, its walls adorned with faded tapestries depicting battles long forgotten. A massive chandelier hung precariously above, its candles unlit, and a spiral staircase wound upward into darkness. The air was heavy with the scent of mildew and something sharper gunpowder, Poirot noted with a frown. Their footsteps echoed as they crossed the hall, Poirot's keen eyes scanning every detail. He paused before a tapestry showing a lion rampant, its claws raised as if to strike. "The lion sleeps," he murmured, running a gloved finger along the fabric. With a gentle tug, he pulled the tapestry aside, revealing a hidden door of rough-hewn stone. A faint draught carried the sound of dripping water from within. "Clever," Hastings said, his voice tinged with admiration. "But how did you know that Lion Mon Ami is not merely a symbol? It is a guide." The Big Four, they are theatrical in their methods, always leaving clues to taunt us, but in their arrogance they reveal their hand. The door opened into a narrow passage, its walls slick with moisture. Torches sputtered in iron sconces, casting flickering shadows that danced like specters. Poirot led the way, his steps measured, while Hastings kept his revolver at the ready. The passage descended into the bowels of the castle, twisting and turning until it opened into a vast chamber. Stone arches supported a domed ceiling, and at the chamber's center stood a circular table, its surface carved with a map of the world. 4 chairs surrounded it, each bearing a distinct symbol: a dragon, a serpent, a wolf, and an eagle. "The Big Four," Poirot said softly, his voice echoing in the cavernous space. "This is their council chamber, where they plot their dominion over the world." Hastings approached the table, his eyes drawn to the map. Lines crisscrossed continents, marked with dates and cryptic notations. "Look at this, Poirot. London, Paris, Shanghai, Venice, and now here. They've been orchestrating chaos across the globe. And their next move is no less ambitious." Poirot's finger traced a line to Vienna, where a single word was scrawled: propaganda. "They seek to control not only economies and weapons but the minds of men. A campaign of lies, of fear, to bend nations to their will, before they could study the map further." A low rumble shook the chamber. Dust fell from the ceiling, and the sound of grinding stone filled the air. The walls themselves seemed to shift, revealing hidden alcoves from which armed figures emerged, mercenaries, their faces obscured by black scarves, their rifles glinting in the torchlight. "Poirot," Hastings shouted, raising his revolver. As the mercenaries closed in, "Calm yourself, Hastings," Poirot said, his voice steady despite the danger. "We are not yet checkmated." The mercenaries moved with military precision, their leader a towering man with a scarred face stepping forward. "You've meddled too long, little detective," he growled, his accent thick with Eastern European tones. "The Big Four send their regards." Poirot's eyes darted around the chamber, taking in every detail: the mercenaries' positions, the flickering torches, the ancient mechanisms embedded in the walls. "Monsieur, you assume I am unprepared, but Hercule Poirot is never unprepared." With a swift motion, Poirot kicked over a torch, sending it rolling toward a pile of crates in the corner. The crates, marked with warnings of flammability, erupted in a blaze, forcing the mercenaries to scatter. In the chaos, Poirot grabbed Hastings and pulled him toward a side passage. "Run, mon ami. The castle itself shall be our ally." The passage led to a maze of corridors, each lined with traps, swinging blades, collapsing floors, and hidden pits. Poirot navigated them with uncanny precision, his mind mapping the labyrinth as if he'd walked it 1,000 times. "These traps," he called to Hastings, "they are old, designed to protect the castle's secrets. The Big Four have merely repurposed them." Behind them, the mercenaries pursued, their shouts echoing through the stone corridors. Poirot paused at a junction, his fingers brushing against a carved stone in the wall. With a press, a hidden panel. It slid open, revealing a rusted lever. "The ingenuity of the ancients," he said with a smile. "They built this castle to withstand invaders. Let us see how it fares against our foes." He pulled the lever and the corridor shuddered. A series of iron grates slammed down, separating the mercenaries into smaller groups. Shouts of confusion followed, and Poirot seized the moment to lead Hastings deeper into the maze. They emerged in a circular chamber dominated by a massive stone statue of a lion, its eyes glowing faintly with some luminescent mineral. "The lion sleeps," Poirot said, his voice triumphant. He circled the statue, his fingers probing its base until he found a concealed latch. With a click, the statue's pedestal slid aside, revealing a cache of documents and a single, ornate key. The Big Four's plans, and perhaps the means to unlock their final stronghold. Hastings, panting from the chase, stared at the documents. "What are they planning, Poirot?" "This propaganda business, it sounds devilish." Poirot's eyes scanned the papers, his brow furrowing. "A network of lies. Hastings, false reports, forged documents, broadcasts designed to sow discord. They aim to turn nations against one another, to create chaos from which they will rise as puppet masters. But this key," he held up the ornate object, its surface etched with a serpent, entwined around a staff. "This will lead us to Vienna, to their heart." The sound of boots echoed closer, signaling that the mercenaries had regrouped. Poirot slipped the key and documents into his coat and motioned for Hastings to follow. "We must move quickly. The castle has served its purpose, but it will not hold them forever." They navigated a final series of corridors, emerging into a crumbling tower overlooking the moors. Below, the mercenaries were spreading out, searching the castle's perimeter. Poirot's eyes fell on an ancient pulley system, its ropes frayed but intact. "A relic of the castle's defenses," he said. "It will serve us now." With Hastings' help, Poirot rigged the pulley to lower them to the ground outside the castle walls. As they descended, a mercenary spotted them and raised the alarm. But the duo reached the moors and vanished into the mist before pursuit could organize. They trekked through the night, the cold biting at their heels, until they reached a small village where a trusted contact awaited with a car. As they sped away from Dunmore Castle, Hastings glanced at Poirot, who was studying the captured documents by the light of a pocket torch. "What's next, Poirot?" "Vienna, oui mon ami, Vienna, where the Big Four dance their deadly waltz. But we have their plans, their key, and the will to stop them. The game is not yet over." The car rattled down the winding road, carrying them toward the next chapter of their battle against the Big Four. The documents revealed a chilling truth. The propaganda campaign was already underway, with agents embedded in major cities, spreading lies through newspapers, radio, and even coded messages hidden in public performances. Vienna was the nexus, where the Big Four would coordinate their final push for global control. Poirot's mind raced as he pieced together the clues. The key, with its serpent motif, suggested a connection to the Big Four's second member, the ruthless financier whose schemes they'd thwarted on the Orient Express. The documents detailed a meeting at the Vienna State Opera, where the Big Four would finalize their plans during a performance of The Marriage of Figaro. The opera house, with its labyrinthine corridors and hidden boxes, would be the perfect stage for their machinations, and for Poirot's counterstroke. The journey to Vienna was fraught with peril. The Big Four, aware of their escape from Dunmore, sent agents to intercept them at every turn. In a small French port, Poirot and Hastings evaded a pair of assassins disguised as dock workers, thanks to Poirot's quick thinking and a distraction involving a crate of fish. On a train crossing the Alps, a sabotaged brake nearly sent them plummeting into a ravine, but Poirot's knowledge of mechanics allowed him to jury-rig a solution, saving the passengers and themselves. Each encounter only deepened Poirot's resolve. "They grow desperate," he told Hastings as they crossed into Austria. "The Big Four. They sense the net closing, but they do not yet know the strength of Hercule Poirot's net." In Vienna, the city sparkled with the elegance of a bygone era, its streets alive with music and light. The State Opera loomed like a palace, its golden facade a stark contrast to the dark secrets it harbored. Poirot and Hastings, disguised as wealthy patrons, secured tickets to the performance. The key, carefully concealed in Poirot's waistcoat, was their ticket to the Big Four's inner sanctum. The opera house was a maze of velvet curtains and gilded halls, its air thick with the scent of perfume and anticipation. As the overture began, Poirot's eyes scanned the crowd, picking out faces that didn't belong, a man with a scar too precise to be accidental, a woman whose nervous glances betrayed her calm demeanor. "They are here," he whispered to Hastings, "the Big Four's agents, watching, waiting." During the intermission, Poirot slipped away, following a hunch to the opera house's upper levels. The key fit a locked door behind a forgotten storage room, revealing a hidden chamber where the Big Four's operatives were preparing their propaganda materials. Stacks of forged documents, radio equipment, and coded scripts for broadcasts that would inflame tensions across Europe before Poirot could investigate further. The scarred man from the crowd appeared, a silenced pistol in hand. "You're too late, Poirot," he sneered. "The wheels are already turning." "Perhaps," Poirot said, his voice calm, "but wheels can be stopped." With a flick of his wrist, he tossed a vial of ink from his pocket, splattering the man's face and momentarily blinding him. In the ensuing struggle, Poirot disarmed him, binding his hands with a curtain cord. "You will tell me much, monsieur, before this night is over." Hastings arrived, breathless, having noticed Poirot's absence. Together they secured the chamber and its contents, ensuring the propaganda materials would not reach their intended destinations. But the victory was short-lived. An explosion rocked the opera house, a diversion set by the Big Four to cover their escape. In the chaos, Li Changyen, the cunning mastermind, slipped through their grasp, leaving behind a taunting note: "The desert awaits Poirot." As the opera house emptied, Poirot and Hastings emerged into the Viennese night, the captured documents in key their only solace. The note pointed to Egypt, to a stronghold in the sands where the Big Four's scientists with crafting a weapon of unimaginable destruction. The stakes were higher than ever, and Poirot knew the final battle was approaching. "We go to Egypt, Hastings," he said, his eyes burning with determination. The Big Four believe they hold the winning hand, but Hercule Poirot plays a different game. The chapter closed with the two men boarding a train bound for the coast, the lights of Vienna fading behind them. The documents, the key, and the memory of Dunmore Castle's traps were their weapons, and the desert their next battlefield. The Big Four's enigma was unraveling, but the cost of victory remained uncertain. Chapter 7. Vienna's deadly waltz. The Viennese night was alive with music, the city's heartbeat pulsing through its grand boulevards and cobblestone alleys. The golden glow of street lamps reflected off the Danube, casting a shimmering veil over the capital of Austria. Hercule Poirot, impeccably dressed in a tailored black suit, adjusted his bow tie as he stepped out of a horse-drawn carriage, his polished shoes clicking against the pavement. Beside him, Captain Arthur Hastings, ever the loyal companion, tugged at his collar, looking slightly out of place in the opulent surroundings of Vienna's Innenstadt. "Mon ami," Poirot said, his voice low but sharp, "tonight we enter the lion's den. The Big Four are here, in this city of waltzes and secrets, and we must dance their deadly dance with utmost precision. One misstep, and we are lost." Hastings nodded, his jaw set. "I don't like it, Poirot. This place feels like a trap." "You're sure about the opera house?" Poirot's green eyes gleamed with certainty. "The opera house, Hastings, the Staatsoper, is the stage where the Big Four will play their final act before moving to their next target. The coded message from Scotland was clear: a performance tonight will mask their meeting. We must be there, unseen, to uncover their plans." The two men made their way through the bustling crowd. Their destination, the majestic Vienna State Opera House, its neo-Renaissance facade looming like a fortress of culture. The air was thick with the scent of perfume and anticipation. As elegantly dressed patrons streamed toward the entrance, their laughter mingling with the distant strains of a Strauss waltz. Poirot's mind, however, was far from the music. The captured document from the Scottish castle had revealed a chilling truth. The Big Four were finalizing a scheme to destabilize world governments, and Vienna was their staging ground. The name Li Changyen, the cunning mastermind, had surfaced again, and Poirot knew this encounter would test his intellect like never before. Inside the opera house was a cathedral of opulence. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over crimson. Velvet seats and gilded balconies soared above the auditorium. Poirot and Hastings slipped into a private box on the second tier, courtesy of a discreet bribe to an usher. From their vantage point, they could observe the entire theater, the stage where Die Fledermaus was about to begin, the orchestra tuning their instruments, and the sea of faces below, any one of which could belong to their elusive enemies. Poirot leaned forward, his eyes scanning the crowd. "Look for the unusual, Hastings. The Big Four are masters of subtlety. They will not announce themselves with fanfare, but with a glance, a gesture, a detail out of place." Hastings squinted, trying to emulate Poirot's keen observation. "There's a fellow in the third row, center. He keeps checking his pocket watch, but he's not looking at the time, he's scanning the room." Poirot followed Hastings' gaze. The man in question was nondescript, his evening attire unremarkable, but his movements were too deliberate, too calculated. Bon Poirot murmured, "A possible agent. But we seek the leaders, not the pawns. Keep watching." As the lights dimmed and the overture swelled, Poirot's attention shifted to a private box across the theater. A figure sat in shadow, barely visible, but the glint of a jade ring on their hand caught the lighter ring Poirot had seen before, in Paris, on the hand of Li Changyen. His heart quickened. "There, Hastings," he whispered. "The spider sits at the center of the web." The performance began, the stage alive with color and movement, but Poirot's focus remained on the box. The figure was joined by another, a woman with a sleek chignon and a gown that shimmered like liquid silver. Her posture was regal, but her eyes darted nervously, betraying her composure. Poirot recognized her from the ledger's description. Scientist, the third member of the Big Four, whose chemical weapon had nearly succeeded in Shanghai. We must get closer, Poirot said, rising. The interval will be our chance. Follow me, and stay alert. The first act passed in a blur of music and tension. When the curtains fell for the interval, the audience spilled into the grand foyer, a glittering throng of silk and jewels. Poirot and Hastings navigated the crowd, their movements casual but purposeful. Poirot's eyes never left the private box, now empty, as its occupants had joined the throng below. He spotted Li Changyen near a marble pillar, engaged in hushed conversation with the scientist. Their words were inaudible, but their body language spoke volumes: urgency, secrecy, and a shared purpose. Poirot Hastings whispered, "They're heading toward the east wing. There's a private staircase there, leads to the administrative offices." "Excellent observation, mon ami," Poirot said, his voice tinged with approval. "We follow, but with care. They will have guards, and we must not be seen." The east wing was quieter, the sounds of the crowd fading as they ascended the staircase. The air grew heavy, the opulence of the opera house giving way to dimly lit corridors lined with locked doors. Poirot's senses were on high alert, his mind piecing together the fragments of their mission. The Big Four were here to finalize a deal, likely involving the propaganda campaign hinted at in Scotland. But what form would it take, and how could they stop it? At the end of the corridor, a heavy oak door stood ajar, a sliver of light spilling onto the carpet. Poirot gestured for Hastings to stay back as he crept forward, his ear pressed to the crack. Voices drifted out, low and urgent. "The pamphlets are ready," the scientist was saying. "Distribution begins tomorrow, across Europe. The message will spread like wildfire, and the funds." Li Changyen's voice was smooth, almost serpentine. "The financier assures me the accounts are secure." "They are," came a third voice, gruff and American. "The financier," Poirot deduced. "But we need to move quickly. The summit in New York is our window. If we miss it, the plan collapses." Poirot's mind raced. Pamphlets, funds, a summit in New York. This was the heart of the Big Four's scheme, a propaganda campaign to sow discord, backed by vast wealth, timed to disrupt a global summit. He needed evidence, something tangible to expose their network. He signaled to Hastings, and they slipped into the shadows as the door opened. Li Changyen emerged, his jade ring glinting as he adjusted his cufflinks. The scientist followed, her expression cold and resolute. They moved toward another staircase, descending into the bowels of the opera house. Poirot and Hastings followed at a distance, their footsteps muffled by the thick carpet. The staircase led to a service corridor, damp and claustrophobic, lined with pipes and flickering gas lamps. The air smelled of mildew and machine oil, a stark contrast to the elegance above. Poirot's instincts told him they were nearing the Big Four's inner sanctum, a place where their plans would be laid bare suddenly. A shadow loomed ahead, a guard, broad-shouldered and armed with a revolver. Poirot froze, pressing himself against the wall. Hastings, less accustomed to stealth, stumbled slightly, and the guard's head snapped toward them. "Who's there?" The guard barked, raising his weapon. Poirot acted swiftly, grabbing a nearby fire extinguisher and hurling it at the guard's legs. The man stumbled, his shot going wild, and Hastings tackled him to the ground. A brief struggle ensued, but Hastings' military training prevailed, and the guard was quickly subdued, bound with his own belt. "Quickly, Hastings," Poirot whispered, dragging the guard into a storage closet. "We have little time before they notice his absence." They pressed on, the corridor narrowing until it opened into a vast underground chamber. The space was a labyrinth of crates and machinery, illuminated by a single chandelier that cast eerie shadows. At the center stood a table, littered with maps, documents, and a printing press in operation designed to produce the propaganda pamphlets. Li Changyen and the scientists were there, joined by the financier and a fourth figure, cloaked in darkness, the master of disguise, Poirot presumed. They were engrossed in a heated discussion, unaware of the intruders. "We need to secure those documents," Poirot whispered. "They are the key to exposing their network." Hastings nodded, his hand resting on the revolver he'd taken from the guard. "How do we get them without being seen?" Poirot's eyes darted around the chamber, landing on a ventilation shaft above the table. "The air vents, Hastings. They will take us directly above them. From there we can drop down and seize the papers before they react." The plan was risky, but time was short. They climbed a stack of crates to reach the vent, crawling through the dusty, claustrophobic space until they were directly above the table. Through the slats, Poirot could see the documents, maps of Europe marked with distribution points, lists of contacts and financial ledgers detailing the Big Four's wealth. "Now, Hastings," Poirot whispered, and they dropped silently onto the table, startling the Big Four. Hastings brandished the revolver, keeping the group at bay, while Poirot scooped up the documents, stuffing them into his coat. Li Changyen's eyes narrowed, a dangerous smile playing on his lips. "Monsieur Poirot, you are as persistent as a cockroach, but you are in over your head." "Perhaps," Poirot said, his voice calm but steely. "But the little gray cells, they do not fail me. Your empire of lies will crumble tonight." The scientist lunged for a hidden button on the table, but Poirot was faster, knocking it out of reach. The financier roared, charging at Hastings, who fired a warning shot into the ceiling. The master of disguise vanished into the shadows, leaving only a mocking laugh. After them, Li Chang-yen shouted, and the chamber erupted into chaos. Guards poured in from hidden passages, their footsteps echoing like thunder. Poirot and Hastings sprinted for the exit, clutching the documents tightly. The chase led them into Vienna's sewers, a dank maze of tunnels where the air was thick with the stench of decay. Li Chang-yen and his men were close behind, their torches casting flickering light on the slimy walls. Poirot's mind worked furiously, mapping the labyrinth as they ran. He spotted a narrow side tunnel, barely wide enough for a man, and pulled Hastings inside. "Quiet," he whispered, as the pursuers' footsteps passed by. The tunnel was a dead end, but it bought them time. Poirot examined the documents by the light of a match, his eyes scanning the pages with lightning speed. "Mon Dieu," he murmured. "The scope of their plan is staggering. They have agents in every major city ready to distribute these pamphlets at the New York summit, and look a map to a desert stronghold in Egypt, their final base." Hastings' face was grim. "We can't let them succeed, Poirot. But how do we get out of here?" Poirot's eyes gleamed with sudden inspiration. "The sewers connect to the Danube. There will be an outflow grate near the river. We must find it before they do." They crawled through the tunnel, emerging into a larger passage where the sound of rushing water grew louder. The outflow grate was ahead, rusted but passable. Poirot worked quickly, loosening the bolts with a piece of debris, while Hastings kept watch. The distant shouts of their pursuers grew closer, and a bullet ricocheted off the wall. "Hurry, Poirot," Hastings urged, firing back to cover their escape. With a final heave, the grate gave way, and they tumbled into the icy waters of the Danube. The current was strong, but Poirot clung to the documents, wrapping them in his waterproofed coat. They swam to the riverbank, emerging soaked but alive, as the lights of Vienna twinkled in the distance. "We have the evidence," Hastings, Poirot said, his voice triumphant despite his bedraggled state. "The Big Four's network is exposed, but we are not finished. This map points to Egypt, a desert stronghold where their final weapon awaits." Hastings shivered, pulling his coat tighter. "Egypt sounds like another adventure. But first, can we find a warm fire and some dry clothes?" Poirot chuckled, his mustache twitching. "Patience, mon ami. The fire of justice burns brighter than any hearth. To Egypt we go, to end this deadly waltz once and for all." They vanished into the night, the documents clutched tightly, as the city of Vienna continued its eternal dance, unaware of the danger that had been narrowly averted. The stage was set for the next act, in the sands of Egypt, where Poirot's little grey cells would face their greatest challenge yet. Chapter 8. The Sands of Betrayal. The sun blazed mercilessly over the Egyptian desert, its golden rays transforming the endless dunes into a shimmering sea of heat. Hercule Poirot adjusted his Panama hat, shielding his eyes from the glare as he stood beside Captain Hastings on a rocky outcrop. Below them, the vast expanse of sand stretched toward the horizon, broken only by the faint outline of an ancient ruin half buried in the dunes. The air was thick with the scent of dust and the distant promise of danger. "This, mon ami," Poirot said, his voice calm but laced with a quiet intensity, "is where the Big Four have chosen to hide their final weapon, a place where the sands themselves guard their secrets." Hastings wiped sweat from his brow, his khaki suit already clinging to his frame. "I don't like it, Poirot. This place feels like a trap. How do we even know we're in the right spot? That clue from Vienna could have been a decoy." Poirot's mustache twitched in what might have been a smile. "The clue was no decoy, Hastings. The coded message in the Opera House ledger was precise coordinates, a description of a tomb beneath the dunes, and a reference to the scorpion sting. The Big Four are here, and they are close to completing their catastrophic device. We must act swiftly." The journey to Egypt had been a whirlwind. After their harrowing escape from Vienna sewers, Poirot had deciphered the final piece of evidence, a map fragment pointing to a forgotten archaeological site in the western desert, near the Siwa oasis. The Big Four's third member, the femme fatale scientist known only as Madame Veronique, was rumored to be developing a weapon capable of leveling cities, a chemical monstrosity that could shift the balance of global power. Poirot's resolve to stop her burned brighter than the desert sun. They descended the outcrop, their boots sinking into the soft sand as they approached the ruin. It was a crumbling structure half-eaten by time, its sandstone walls etched with faded hieroglyphs. A narrow entrance yawned at its base, leading into darkness. Poirot paused, his sharp eyes scanning the surroundings. "Be vigilant, Hastings. The Big Four do not leave their lairs unguarded." Hastings gripped his revolver, his nerves taut. "I'm ready, Poirot. Let's get this over with." Inside, the air was cool and musty, a stark contrast to the furnace. Outside, their torchlights cast flickering shadows on the walls, revealing intricate carvings of scarabs and pharaohs. The passage sloped downward, twisting into the earth like a serpent. Poirot moved with deliberate care, his small frame oddly graceful in the confined space. Hastings followed, his heart pounding as the silence grew oppressive. After several minutes, the passage opened into a vast chamber. The torchlight revealed a startling sight, a modern laboratory carved into the ancient tomb. Metal tables gleamed under electric lights, lined with vials, beakers, and strange machinery. At the center stood a massive cylindrical device. Its surface, studded with dials and tubes, a grotesque fusion of science and menace. Madame Veronique stood before it, her sleek black hair pulled into a tight bun, her lab coat pristine despite the dust. She turned as they entered, her green eyes glinting with cold amusement. "Monsieur Poirot," she purred, her French accent sharp as a blade. "I wondered when you'd find us. You're as persistent as a sandstorm." Poirot inclined his head, unfazed. "Madame Veronique, your work here is an abomination. This weapon of yours will not see the light of day." She laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Bold words for a man in my domain. You're too late. The device is nearly complete. One test, and the world will kneel to the Big Four." Hastings stepped forward, his revolver raised. "Step away from that thing, or I'll" Before he could finish, a figure emerged from the shadows, a tall man in a Bedouin robe, his face obscured by a scarf. He moved with lethal speed, knocking the revolver from Hastings' hand. Poirot spun, but another figure appeared behind him, pinning his arms. The chamber erupted into chaos as more men materialized, their weapons glinting in the torchlight. "Traitors!" Hastings shouted, struggling against his captor. "Who's behind this?" Poirot's eyes darted across the room, his mind racing. "Not traitors, Hastings, mercenaries, hired by the Big Four to ensure their work proceeds uninterrupted." He addressed Madame Veronique, his voice steady despite the grip on his arms. "You underestimate Hercule Poirot, madame. You think me trapped, but I am never without a plan." Veronique smirked, gesturing to the cylindrical device. "Your plans are dust, Poirot. This weapon will be activated tonight, and no one, not even you, can stop it." But Poirot's gaze had shifted to the man holding Hastings. There was something familiar in his stance, the way his shoulders slouched slightly. "Mon ami," Poirot said softly, "you have been most convincing. But I know you, Inspector Japp." The man froze, then slowly unwrapped the scar from his face, revealing the weathered features of Chief Inspector Japp of Scotland Yard. Hastings gaped, his shock palpable. "Japp, you're working with them." Japp's expression was grim. "I'm sorry, Hastings, they got to my family. Threatened my wife and kids. I had no choice." Poirot nodded, his eyes filled with understanding rather than judgment. "The Big Four are masters of coercion, Inspector, but you have made a grave error in betraying your allies." Veronique's smirk faltered. "Enough of this. Kill them, both, and be done with it." But Japp hesitated, his grip on Hastings loosening. In that moment, Poirot acted with a swift twist. He freed himself from his captor, grabbing a vial from a nearby table and hurling it at the mercenaries. The vial shattered, releasing a cloud of choking gas. Coughing and disoriented, the mercenaries stumbled, giving Poirot and Hastings the chance to break free. "Run, Hastings," Poirot shouted, darting toward the device. Hastings grabbed his revolver and followed, firing warning shots to keep the mercenaries at bay. They reached the device where Poirot's nimble fingers began dismantling its controls. His face a mask of concentration. Veronique lunged at him, a dagger gleaming in her hand. "You'll ruin everything," she snarled. Hastings tackled her, pinning her to the ground. "Not today, lady." Poirot worked feverishly, rewiring circuits and disconnecting tubes. The device began to hum ominously, its dials flickering wildly. "Hastings, we must leave." They dragged Veronique with them, racing back through the passage as the chamber began to shake. Behind them, the device emitted a piercing whine, and the walls trembled as if the tomb itself were collapsing. They burst into the open air just as a deafening explosion rocked the desert, sending a plume of sand and smoke skyward. Panting, they collapsed onto the dunes, Veronique still struggling in Hastings' grip. Japp emerged from the ruin, his face ashen. "Poirot." Poirot raised a hand, silencing him. "Your betrayal was a wound, Inspector, but your heart was coerced. Help us now, and perhaps you may redeem yourself." Japp nodded, shame etched into his features. "What's the next move?" Poirot's eyes gleamed as he pulled a small, sand-covered scroll from his pocket, a final clue retrieved from the lab. "The Big Four's endgame lies in New York. We have stopped their weapon, but their ambition remains. We must pursue them to the heart of their power." As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the desert, Poirot stood, his silhouette small but unyielding against the vastness. The game was far from over, and Hercule Poirot was ready for the next move. The desert night was cold, a stark contrast to the day's blistering heat. Poirot, Hastings, and Japp made their way to a nearby Bedouin camp where they secured camels and supplies for the journey back to Cairo. Veronique, now bound and silent, was a constant reminder of the stakes. Her defiance had not waned, but Poirot's calm assurance seemed to unnerve her more than any threat could in Cairo. They boarded a steamer bound for Alexandria, where they would catch a transatlantic liner to New York. The journey gave Poirot time to reflect, his mind piecing together the puzzle of the Big Four. The scroll, written in a cipher he had cracked aboard the steamer, detailed a summit in New York where world leaders would gather. The Big Four planned to strike there, using chaos to cement their dominance. But the scroll also hinted at a fracture within the group, a potential weakness Poirot intended to exploit. Hastings, still reeling from Japp's betrayal, kept his distance from the inspector. "I can't believe he turned on us, Poirot," he muttered as they stood at the ship's rail, the Mediterranean stretching endlessly before them. "How can you trust him now?" Poirot's gaze was distant, fixed on the horizon. "Trust is a fragile thing, Hastings, but necessity is a great mender. Japp acted out of fear for his family. We must use his knowledge of the Big Four's tactics to our advantage. He is our ally now, whether you like it or not." The steamer docked in Alexandria, and they transferred to the RMS Oceanic, a grand liner bound for New York. The voyage was tense, with Poirot constantly on guard for agents of the Big Four. Veronique, confined to a guarded cabin, offered no further information, but her smirk suggested she knew more than she let on. Poirot spent hours studying the scroll, cross-referencing it with his notes from the ledger and the map from Shanghai. Slowly, a picture emerged. The Big Four's financier and master of disguise would be in New York, orchestrating the summit. Li Changyen, the elusive mastermind, remained a shadow, his whereabouts unknown. In New York, the city's energy was intoxicating, skyscrapers piercing the sky, streets thrumming with life. Poirot, Hastings, and Japp checked into a modest hotel near Manhattan's financial district, where the summit was to be held. The scroll had mentioned a skyscraper as the Big Four's base, and Poirot's inquiries led them to the newly built Empire Tower, a gleaming monolith of steel and glass. Disguised as maintenance workers, they infiltrated the tower, navigating service corridors and dodging security. Poirot's plan was simple: locate the Big Four's command center, gather evidence, and disrupt their operation before the summit began. But as they ascended in a service elevator, Japp's nervous glances betrayed his unease. "Something's wrong, Poirot," he whispered. "This feels too easy." "They're expecting us." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "Perhaps, Inspector, but Hercule Poirot is never unprepared." The elevator opened onto a floor buzzing with activity men in suits, technicians at consoles, and a massive map of the world projected on a wall. At its center stood the financier, a burly man with a predatory grin, and the master of disguise, his face shifting subtly as he spoke. They were issuing orders, their voices clipped and urgent. Poirot signaled for silence, but before they could retreat, an alarm blared. Guards swarmed the room, and the financier's grin widened. "Welcome, Monsieur Poirot, you've walked right into our trap." A fierce battle erupted, with Hastings and Japp fighting back-to-back as Poirot darted through the chaos, his mind racing for a solution. Using a stolen keycard, he accessed a control panel, overriding the building's security system to lock the guards in a side room. But the financier and the master of disguise were slipping away, heading for the roof. Poirot gave chase, Hastings and Japp close behind. On the rooftop, a bitter wind whipped through the city's skyline, and the two villains stood near a waiting helicopter. "You're too late, Poirot," the financier shouted. "The summit will burn, and the Big Four will rise." But Poirot had anticipated this. Earlier, he had planted a tracking device in the helicopter's fuel line, ensuring it would fail. Mid-flight, as the villains boarded, he signaled to Japp, who fired a precise shot, damaging the rotor. The helicopter sputtered, grounding them. In the ensuing struggle, Hastings tackled the master of disguise, unmasking him to reveal a scarred face, another pawn of Li Changyen. The financier fought fiercely but was subdued by Japp's brute strength. As the police arrived, alerted by Poirot's earlier call, the two members of the Big Four were taken into custody. But the victory was bittersweet. A message, delivered by a courier to their hotel, bore Li Changyen's seal. "You have won a battle, Poirot," it read, "but the war is mine. Come to England if you dare." The scroll's final clue, a reference to a manor in the English countryside, confirmed their next destination. As they boarded a ship back to Europe, Poirot stood at the rail, his eyes fixed on the fading New York skyline. "The Big Four are wounded, Hastings, but not defeated. Li Changyen plays a long game, but so does Hercule Poirot. The desert had tested them, and betrayal had shaken their trust, but the chase was far from over. With the world hanging in the balance, Poirot's little gray cells were already plotting the final checkmate. Chapter 9. The New York Showdown. The salty tang of the Atlantic breeze mingled with the urban clamor of New York City as Hercule Poirot stepped off the steamer onto the bustling docks of Manhattan. The year was 1926, and the city thrummed with the energy of jazz, ambition, and secrets. Skyscrapers loomed like giants, their steel and glass catching the late afternoon sun, casting long shadows over the streets below. Beside Poirot, Captain Arthur Hastings adjusted his hat, his eyes wide with the spectacle of it all. The journey from Egypt had been arduous, but the cryptic clue they'd uncovered in the desert, a scrap of paper with the words "Summit Manhattan," chaos had brought them here, to the heart of a burgeoning metropolis where the Big Four's final gambit was set to unfold. Poirot's mustache twitched as he surveyed the dockside chaos, stevedores shouting, crates swinging from cranes, and passengers jostling for cabs. "Mon ami," he said, his voice calm yet edged with urgency. This city, it is a chessboard, and we are but pawns in the game of the big foreign, lest we move with precision. Their plan, it is near its crescendo. We must find this summit and prevent the chaos they intend. Hastings nodded, though his brow furrowed. But Poirot, a summit in New York, it could be anything, a political gathering, a business conference, and we've only got this scrap of paper. Where do we start? Poirot's green eyes gleamed. We start, Hastings, with the little gray cells. The big four do not play small games. This summit, it will be a gathering of power men of influence, perhaps even nations, and chaos. It suggests a spectacle, a disruption to shake the world. We must seek the pulse of this city, its places of importance. Their first stop was a discreet hotel on Fifth Avenue, chosen for its proximity to the city's financial and political hubs. The lobby was a study in opulence, marble floors, chandeliers dripping with crystal, and bellhops darting about like ants. Poirot, ever meticulous, had arranged for a suite under an alias Mr. Henry Dubois, a Belgian antiquarian. As they settled in, he spread a map of Manhattan across a mahogany table, his finger tracing the grid of streets. The clue speaks of a summit, Poirot mused, and New York, it is the center of commerce and diplomacy. The most likely place is a venue of significance, perhaps the Waldorf Astoria, or the new skyscraper they call the Empire State, though it is not yet complete. But no, it must be finished, a place ready to host such an event. Hastings, flipping through a newspaper, paused. What about the Metropolitan Club? It's where the bigwigs, meticoons, senators, even foreign dignitaries. There's a piece here about a global trade conference happening tomorrow night. Could that be it? Poirot's eyes narrowed. Global trade conference. We Hastings. That fits the pattern of the big four. They seek to destabilize economies, governments. Such a gathering would be a perfect target. We must investigate, but with care. The financier and the master of disguised numbers 2 and 4, they will be there, and they know our faces. The next morning Poirot and Hastings set out to reconnoiter the Metropolitan Club, a grand edifice on East 60th Street, its facade, all limestone and restrained elegance. Posing as reporters from a European financial journal, they gained access to the conference's press briefing. The room buzzed with journalists, diplomats, and businessmen, the air thick with cigar smoke and ambition. Poirot's keen gaze swept the crowd, noting every detail, the nervous tick of a German delegate, the too-polished smile of an American industrialist, the way a waiter lingered near a group of bankers. Observe Hastings, Poirot whispered, the man in the grey suit, near the podium. His posture, it is too perfect, too calculated, and his cufflinks jade, like the figurine from London. He is no ordinary delegate. Hastings squinted. You think he's one of them? The financier? Maybe, perhaps, or a pawn in their game. We must follow him. The man in the grey suit, who introduced himself as Mr. Clarence Winthrop, a Wall Street banker, left the briefing early. Poirot and Hastings tailed him through the crowded streets, weaving past honking taxis and newsboys hawking papers. Winthrop led them to a nondescript office building in the financial district, its brass plaque reading Winthrop and Associates, Investments. Inside the office was a hive of activity clerks typing, phones ringing, and a faint scent of ink and cigar smoke. Poirot, adopting the air of a befuddled European investor, managed to secure a brief meeting with Winthrop. The banker was all charm, his voice smooth as silk, but Poirot's questions, carefully worded to probe without alarming, revealed little. Winthrop spoke of markets, investments, and the conference, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of unease when Poirot mentioned international trade routes, and nod to their discoveries in Shanghai. He knows something, Poirot said as they left, his voice low, but he is not the financier, he is too predictable. The financier, he is a shadow, a man who moves others like pieces on a board. We must watch this Winthrop, but our true quarry lies elsewhere. That evening, Poirot and Hastings returned to the Metropolitan Club, this time as guests of a minor diplomat Poirot had charmed in Paris years ago. The conference was in full swing, a glittering affair of tuxedos, gowns, and champagne flutes. The grand ballroom was a sea of power. Senators rubbing elbows with industrialists, foreign ministers whispering to aides. Poirot, impeccable in his evening dress, moved through the crowd like a ghost, his ears attuned to every snippet of conversation. It was Hastings who spotted the anomaly, a woman in a silver gown, her face half hidden by a fan, lingering near a balcony. Her movements were too deliberate, her glances too sharp. Poirot, Hastings whispered. She's watching the French ambassador, and her brooches jade, like the figurine. Poirot's moustache quivered. The master of disguise. Perhaps, or an agent. We must be cautious, Hastings. Follow her, but do not engage. Hastings trailed the woman to the balcony, where she met a man in a waiter's uniform. Their conversation was brief, their gestures furtive. Hastings, hidden behind a potted palm, caught only fragments. Summit, midnight rooftop. He reported back to Poirot, who was now deep in conversation with a British trade minister midnight. On the rooftop, Poirot repeated, his eyes alight. The big four, they plan their chaos there. We must act, Hastings, but with the utmost, with discretion. The roof, it will be guarded, and we are but 2 against their numbers. As the clock neared midnight, Poirot and Hastings slipped away from the ballroom, navigating service corridors to reach the rooftop. The city sprawled below, a glittering tapestry of lights against the night sky. The rooftop was deserted, save for a small group near a maintenance shed, Winthrop, the woman in the silver gown, and to others a burly man with a scarred face and a wiry figure in a black overcoat. The financier and the master of disguise, Poirot realized, his heart quickening. The group was inspecting a crate, its contents hidden. Poirot, crouched behind an air vent, whispered to Hastings, "They plan an attack, perhaps a bomb or something. Worse, we must act swiftly, but we cannot confront them directly. We need a diversion." Hastings, ever the soldier, suggested a bold plan. Start a small fire in the service corridor to trigger the alarms. Poirot agreed, and Hastings slipped away, returning minutes later with the faint smell of smoke on his coat. As the fire alarm blared, the rooftop erupted in chaos. The group scattered, and Poirot seized the moment, darting to the crate. Inside, he found not a bomb, but a cache of documents, blueprints, schedules, and a list of names, all tied to the summit. Mon Dieu, Poirot breathed, slipping the documents into his coat. This is their planned sabotage, assassination, chaos to disrupt the global order. We have what we need, Hastings. Now, we must escape. But escape was not so simple. The woman in the silver gown, her face now unmasked, revealed herself as Madame Leclerc, the master of disguise. Her eyes burned with fury as she drew a pistol. "You've meddled too long, Poirot," she hissed. The financier, a tall man with cold eyes, emerged from the shadows, flanked by the scarred man. A tense standoff ensued, the city's lights casting eerie shadows. Poirot, unarmed but undaunted, used his wit. "Madame, you think you have one? But you have overlooked one thing: the little gray cells. Your plan, it is exposed. The authorities, they are already on their way." It was a bluff, but it bought time. Hastings, ever resourceful, had alerted a security guard below, and the sound of footsteps on the stairs forced the Big Four's agents to hesitate. In that moment, Poirot and Hastings bolted for the fire escape. The documents clutched tightly. A gunshot rang out, grazing Hastings' arm, but they reached the street, disappearing into the chaos of alarmed guests spilling from the club. The next day, in their hotel suite, Poirot pored over the documents. They detailed a plot to assassinate key delegates and plant false evidence to spark a diplomatic crisis. With the evidence, Poirot contacted a trusted ally in the New York Police Department, ensuring the summit's security was tightened. The financier and Madame Leclerc were apprehended at a safe house, identified by the document's clues, but Li Chang-yen, the elusive mastermind, slipped through their grasp, leaving a note. "This is not the end, Poirot." As the sun set over Manhattan, Poirot stood by the window, his expression somber. "Hastings, we have struck a blow, but the game is not over. Li Chang-yen, he is the king on this chessboard, and he will strike again. We must be ready." Chapter 10. The final checkmate. The English countryside stretched before Hercule Poirot and Captain Hastings like a green tapestry woven with threads of mist and morning dew. The secluded manor, nestled in a valley near the village of Ashbadal, stood as a silent sentinel against the rolling hills. Its ivy-clad walls and towering chimneys exuded an air of forgotten grandeur. But to Poirot it was the perfect stage for the final act of a drama that had spanned continents and imperiled the world. The Big Four: Li Chang-yen, the cunning mastermind, the ruthless financier, the femme fatale scientist, and the master of disguise had eluded him long enough. Now, with a plan as intricate as a spider's web, Poirot intended to end their global conspiracy once and for all. The morning was crisp, the air heavy with the scent of damp earth and blooming hawthorn. Poirot, dressed impeccably in a tailored suit despite the rural setting, adjusted his mustache with a gloved finger as he surveyed the manor from the gravel drive. Hastings, ever the loyal companion, stood beside him, his face a mixture of determination and unease. "Poirot," he said, his voice low, "are you certain this will work? Luring Li Chang-yen here, to this remote place, it's a gamble, even for you." Poirot's eyes gleamed with quiet confidence. "Mon ami, a gamble is only such when one does not understand the odds. Hercule Poirot does not gamble. He calculates. The Big Four believe they hold the winning hand, but I have arranged the board for checkmate. Now, come, we must prepare the manor for our guests." The plan had been weeks in the making, born from the clues and documents Poirot had gathered in their perilous journey from Paris to New York. The captured financier and master of disguise, now languishing in custody, had provided fragments of information under pressure. Though Li Chang-yen and the scientist remained at large, Poirot had deduced that the scientist, whose duplicity had nearly cost them their lives in Egypt, was the weak link, a double agent within the Big Four, torn between loyalty and ambition. By planting false intelligence through a network of informants, Poirot had convinced Li Chang-yen that the scientist was preparing to betray him, luring the mastermind to the manor under the pretense of a secret meeting to resolve their internal conflict. Inside the manor, Poirot and Hastings moved with purpose. The grand hall, with its oak-paneled walls and crystal chandelier, was a relic of Edwardian opulence, but its shadows held modern dangers. Poirot had enlisted the aid of Inspector Japp, who, despite his grumbling about Poirot's theatrics, had stationed a discreet team of Scotland Yard's finest in the surrounding woods. The Manor's staff, carefully vetted and replaced with undercover agents, bustled about, maintaining the illusion of normalcy. Poirot, however, was not content to rely solely on brute force. "The mind, Hastings," he said, tapping his temple, "is the sharpest weapon. We must outthink Li Changyen, for he is a man who trusts no one and sees through most deceptions." The trap was multifaceted, a masterpiece of misdirection. Poirot had arranged for a forged letter purportedly from the scientist to reach Li Changyen, hinting at a cache of incriminating documents hidden in the Manor's library. The letter suggested that the scientist intended to sell these documents to a foreign power, thus forcing Li Changyen to act swiftly. To ensure the scientist's presence, Poirot had sent a second message, this one claiming that Li Changyen was planning to eliminate her as a liability. The two would arrive separately, each believing the other to be the sole threat, and Poirot would exploit their mistrust. As dusk settled over the Manor, the air grew thick with anticipation. Hastings paced the library where shelves of leather-bound tomes stretched to the vaulted ceiling. A massive fireplace dominated one wall, its hearth cold but ready to be lit as part of Poirot's plan. "What if they don't come, Poirot?" Hastings asked, his hand resting on the revolver in his pocket. "What if they've seen through it?" Poirot, seated in a high-backed chair, his hands folded calmly, smiled faintly. "They will come. Mon ami, greed and fear are powerful motivators, and the Big Four are driven by both. Li Changyen cannot resist the chance to secure his empire, and the scientist cannot ignore the threat to her survival. Now, take your position by the window and watch for the signal." Hastings obeyed, peering through the heavy velvet curtains at the darkening grounds. The plan required precise timing. Japp's men were to signal with a flash of light when either target was spotted approaching the Manor. Poirot, meanwhile, busied himself with the library's contents, arranging a series of documents, some genuine, some fabricated to serve as bait. Among them was a dossier detailing the Big Four's financial network, painstakingly reconstructed from the coded ledger Poirot had deciphered in London. The dossier, while incomplete, was convincing enough to draw Li Changyen's attention. The first signal came at precisely 8 o'clock, a single flash from the woods. Hastings stiffened. "Poirot, someone's coming." "A car, from the East Road," Bon Poirot said, rising smoothly. "That will be the scientist. She is punctual, as I expected. Prepare the library, Hastings. Light the fire, but some blaze, just enough to cast shadows." Hastings ignited the kindling in the hearth, the flickering light dancing across the room. Poirot adjusted a hidden panel behind a bookshelf, revealing a narrow passage that led to the Manor's upper floors. "If all goes as planned," he murmured, "this will be our escape route. But first, we must play our parts." Moments later, the scientist entered the library, her presence announced by the click of her heels on the polished floor. She was a striking figure, her dark hair pulled back tightly, her eyes sharp with suspicion. She wore a tailored coat, its pockets bulging slightly. Poirot noted the possibility of a concealed weapon. "Where is he?" she demanded, her voice low and edged with tension. "You said Li Changyen would be here." Poirot, standing by the fireplace, bowed slightly. "Mademoiselle, I assure you, all will be revealed in time. You seek the documents. They are here, in this very room. But first, tell me, why do you fear Li Changyen?" The scientist's eyes narrowed. "You know why he's planning to kill me. I have proof of his operations enough to bring him down. But I want immunity, Poirot. I'll give you everything, but you must protect me." Before Poirot could respond, a second flash came from the woods. Hastings whispered urgently, "Another car, West Road, it's him." Poirot's expression remained serene, but his mind raced. The timing was critical. Li Changyen's arrival must not coincide with the scientist's presence in the open. "Mademoiselle," he said, gesturing to the hidden panel, "for your safety, step into the passage. You will observe, but you will not be seen. Vite." The scientist hesitated, then complied, slipping into the passage just as the library door creaked open. Li Changyen entered his presence as commanding as ever. His silk suit was immaculate, his face a mask of calculated calm, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of unease. "Poirot," he said, his voice smooth as velvet, "you are a persistent man. I received your invitation. Where are these documents you claim to possess?" Poirot gestured to the desk, where the dossier lay in plain sight. "Monsieur, you will find all you seek there. But I warn you, the game is not what it seems. You suspect betrayal, do you not? Perhaps from within your own ranks." Li Changyen's gaze sharpened, but he approached the desk, flipping open the dossier. As he read, his expression darkened. "This is incomplete," he said, his voice cold. "You think to toy with me, Poirot. Where is the rest?" At that moment, the scientist emerged from the passage, her revolver drawn. "It's over, Li," she said, her voice trembling with rage. "You thought you could eliminate me, but I've outplayed you." Li Changyen's hand moved to his pocket, but Poirot was faster. With a flick of his wrist he activated a mechanism, hidden in the fireplace, releasing a cloud of smoke that filled the room. In the confusion, Hastings tackled the scientist, disarming her, while Jap's men stormed the library, their footsteps thundering on the oak floor. Li Changyen, caught off guard, attempted to flee through the passage, but Poirot had anticipated. This concealed net, triggered by a pull of a cord, ensnared him, bringing him to the ground. As the smoke cleared, Jap's men secured both the scientist and Li Changyen, their wrists bound with cuffs. The scientist spat curses, her composure shattered, while Li Changyen remained silent, his eyes burning with defiance. Poirot, brushing dust from his suit, addressed them both. You see, Ms. Amos, the Big Four were formidable, but they underestimated the power of order and method. Your network is exposed, your plans dismantled, the game is finished. The aftermath was swift. The dossier, combined with evidence from the financier and master of disguise, provided Scotland Yard with the means to dismantle the Big Four's global operations. Bank accounts were frozen, operatives arrested, and the threat of their catastrophic schemes neutralized. The scientist, revealed as a double agent who had played both sides for her own gain, confessed under interrogation, providing the final pieces of the puzzle. As dawn broke over the manor, Poirot and Hastings sat in the drawing room, a tray of tea and scones before them. The fire crackled warmly, a stark contrast to the chaos of the night. Hastings, still shaken, managed to smile. You did it, Poirot. You caught them all. But how did you know the scientist would turn on Li Changyen? Poirot sipped his tea, his eyes twinkling. The human heart, Hastings, is predictable in its weaknesses. Ambition and fear make strange bedfellows. I merely provided the stage for their distrust to play out. The little grey cells, they do not fail. The world, though unaware of the full extent of the danger, was safe once more. Poirot, ever the perfectionist, reviewed the case in his mind, satisfied that every detail had been accounted for. The Big Four were no more, their legacy, reduced to a cautionary tale of hubris and greed. As the sun rose, casting golden light through the manor's windows, Poirot leaned back in his chair, content to enjoy the quiet victory of a case well solved. The manor, now bustling with Jap's men cataloguing evidence, seemed almost serene. In the morning light, Hastings, finishing his tea, chuckled. What now, Poirot? A holiday, perhaps? You've earned it. Poirot's moustache twitched with a smile. A holiday, Hastings, perhaps. But the world is full of mysteries, and Hercule Poirot is never truly at rest. For now, let us enjoy this moment. The game is won, and that is enough. And so, in the tranquil English countryside, with the echoes of a global conspiracy fading into memory, Poirot and Hastings savored their triumph, the world spinning on, blissfully unaware of the little Belgian detective who had saved it.